My parents invited me to dinner to make amends after 5 years of absolute silence. When the hostess opened the doors, I did not find a quiet table for three. I found 36 extended family members elbow-deep in seafood towers and $300 bottles of wine. My father smiled and told me to hand the waiter my black card. I called the waiter over, whispered 3 sentences, and walked out. 30 minutes later, my brother-in-law texted me that the police were threatening to arrest my father. Before I tell you how I dismantled their fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to show toxic family members exactly who holds the power. I am Camille, 35 years old, and the founder of the most sought-after luxury public relations and crisis management firm in Atlanta. I spend my days scrubbing the reputations of politicians, athletes, and corporate titans. I am trained to spot a trap from a mile away. But family has a twisted way of blinding you to the obvious. For 5 years, I had maintained a strict policy of no contact with my parents, Warren and Brenda. 5 years of peace building my business from a laptop on my kitchen counter to a corner office overlooking the city skyline. So when Brenda sent a tearful voicemail last week begging for a simple quiet dinner to heal our past, a foolish, vulnerable part of me believed her. The humidity of the Atlanta evening clung to my skin as the valet at Prime 88 opened the door of my chauffeur-driven Maybach. Prime 88 was notoriously exclusive, the kind of steakhouse where reservations took months and the prices were whispered rather than printed. I wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, projecting the armor I needed to face the people who had spent my entire youth making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I stepped through the heavy mahogany doors, expecting to find my mother and father sitting nervously in a quiet booth ready to apologize for a lifetime of conditional love. The hostess smiled warmly, recognizing me immediately. She led me past the main dining room down a dimly lit corridor lined with vintage wine cellars and stopped in front of the private banquet double doors. When she pushed them open, the noise hit me like a physical blow. It was not a quiet table for 3. It was a chaotic, booming banquet of 36 extended family members. I stood frozen in the doorway. Aunties I had not seen since college. Cousins who only called when they needed bail money, and church members who used to gossip about my lack of a husband, were all crammed around a massive, glittering table. The visual was staggering. The table was littered with the carnage of extreme gluttony. 3-tiered seafood towers were stripped down to the melting ice. Massive bone and Wagyu ribeye steaks rested on grease-stained china. At least 6 empty bottles of Cristal champagne were pushed to the center. They had been here for hours, eating and drinking with reckless abandon. At the head of the table sat my father, Warren. He was wearing a suit that looked 10 years out of style, holding court like a king who had finally conquered a kingdom he did not build. He spotted me standing in the doorway. The raucous conversation slowly died down as 36 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. There was no warmth in their gazes, only calculation and a sickening sense of entitlement. Warren did not stand up to greet me. He did not say he missed me. Instead, he casually picked up a linen napkin, wiped a smear of garlic butter from his chin, and flashed a smile that made my stomach turn. "Look who finally decided to show up," Warren announced, his voice booming so the entire room could hear. "Hand the waiter your black card, Camille. You are treating your family tonight right. It is the least you can do after abandoning us for 5 years." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air. I looked at my mother Brenda sitting next to him. She offered a weak, placating smile, adjusting her cheap pearls. She had orchestrated this. She had used the promise of a mother-daughter reconciliation to fund a lavish family reunion she and Warren could never afford on their own. They wanted to play rich for their church friends, and I was supposed to be the bank. Before I could even process the betrayal, my younger sister Jasmine chimed in. Jasmine was the undeniable golden child, the one who never heard the word no, the one who was currently wearing a designer dress. She undoubtedly put on a credit card she could not pay off. She sneered over the rim of her champagne glass, setting the baseline for our history in one breath. Do not be stingy, Cammy Jasmine said, swirling her drink. Trent and I just closed on our new boat, and Malik is between jobs again. You sit in that fancy downtown office of yours all day, with no husband and no kids to worry about. It is time you paid back the village that raised you. Trent, her white husband, leaned back in his chair with a smug expression. He worked in middle management corporate finance and carried himself with an unearned arrogance that had always rubbed me the wrong way. He loved to use racially coded microaggressions disguised as compliments, masking his deep insecurity about my financial superiority. Yeah, Camille, Trent added, gesturing lazily with his fork. Share the wealth. We all know those diversity contracts your firm gets pay very well. You can cover a family dinner. I looked at Malik, my reckless older brother, who was currently shoveling a piece of lobster tail into his mouth while trying to avoid my gaze. Malik, who was $20,000 in debt to underground bookies. Malik, who Warren and Brenda constantly shielded from consequences. They wanted me to pay for this feast, while they mocked my life, my business, and my independence. Brenda finally spoke up, her voice taking on that familiar manipulative tone she used whenever she wanted to force compliance. Do not make a scene, Camille. We are family. Family takes care of each other. You have been blessed with so much, and God expects you to share those blessings with the people who put a roof over your head. A roof over my head. I wanted to laugh. I remembered being a teenager working double shifts at a diner just to buy my own school clothes because Warren claimed money was tight, while simultaneously funding Jasmine's expensive cheerleading camps. I remembered the harsh lessons of discipline Warren claimed he was teaching me by charging me rent the month I turned 18, while Malik lived in the basement for free well into his late 20s. They had never nurtured my success. They had only ever tried to extract it. They sat there chewing on $100 steaks waiting for the successful single black woman to fold under the pressure of familial guilt. They expected me to shrink to hand over my card to avoid embarrassing them in front of the cousins and the church elders. They thought my desire for their love was stronger than my self-respect. They were deeply, fatally wrong. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear. I did not justify my existence or defend the business I had built with my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. I simply stood perfectly still, my posture radiating the kind of absolute authority they could never comprehend. I raised 2 fingers in the air. The head waiter, who had been hovering nervously near the walls, rushed over to me immediately. He recognized me not just as a wealthy patron, but as someone intimately connected to the restaurant. I leaned in close to him, ensuring my voice was low, calm, and completely out of earshot of my grinning family. I whispered exactly 3 sentences into his ear. I am the silent majority owner of this restaurant group. Comp my sparkling water and drop the $6,700 check directly in my father's lap. If they cannot pay the balance in full, lock the doors and call the Atlanta Police Department. The waiter's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he gave a crisp, professional nod. He understood exactly what was required. I turned my attention back to the long, crowded table. Warren was still smirking, his hand outstretched, expecting me to pull out my wallet. Jasmine was whispering something to Trent, both of them looking at me with thinly veiled contempt. I smoothly adjusted the lapels of my coat, offering the room a perfectly polished, entirely hollow smile. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone, I announced, my voice carrying clearly over the lingering chatter. I am just going to step out to the restroom to touch up my lipstick. I will be right back. I turned on my heel and walked out of the private room. I did not run. I glided down the corridor past the hostess stand and straight out the heavy front doors into the humid Atlanta night. I handed the valet a crisp $100 bill, slid into the plush leatherback seat of my waiting vehicle, and told my driver to take me home. The ride back to my private gated community was peaceful. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, feeling an immense, profound sense of liberation. For 5 years, a small, guilty part of me had wondered if cutting them off had been too harsh. Tonight they had handed me the absolute validation I needed. They had not wanted to make amends, they had wanted to make me pay. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on my velvet living room sofa, sipping a freshly made macchiato, when the explosion finally happened. My phone, which had been silent all evening, suddenly lit up like a fireworks display. I watched the notifications pile up on the screen, a relentless cascade of panic. There were 14 missed calls from Warren, 8 from Brenda, dozens of frantic misspelled text messages from cousins demanding to know where I went. The reality of the $6,700 bill had clearly landed on the table. I slowly scrolled through the messages, savoring the sheer terror radiating from the screen. Warren's texts shifted rapidly from arrogant demands to outright panic. "Get back here right now. They are not letting us leave. Camille, this is not funny. The manager is talking about calling the authorities. You need to pay this." Brenda's messages were a masterclass in emotional manipulation, dripping with desperate guilt trips. "How could you do this to your own parents? Auntie Denise is crying. We do not have the limit on our cards for this. Please come back. We will pay you back, I promise." I did not respond to a single one. I simply took another sip of my coffee, letting them stew in the consequences of their own gluttony. They had ordered the lobster and the wagyu. Now they could figure out how to digest the bill. Then a final aggressively hostile text came through. It was from Trent, my arrogant white brother-in-law. The man who had mocked my diversity contracts just an hour earlier was now losing his mind. "You absolute psycho," Trent wrote. "The cops are literally walking through the front doors right now. They are threatening to arrest Warren for theft of services. Pay this bill over the phone right now, or I swear to God I will ruin your little PR business tomorrow morning. I will go to the press. You messed with the wrong guy." I stared at his threat, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Trent thought he was dealing with an emotional, easily intimidated woman. He did not realize he was threatening a woman who made a living destroying men far more powerful than a middle management finance bro. I set my coffee mug down on the glass table, picked up my phone, and typed my first and only response of the night directly to Trent. "I suggest you check your own company's compliance records before you threaten my business, Trent. Good luck with the police." I hit send, switched my phone to silent, and leaned back into the cushions. The trap had been sprung, but the real war was only just beginning. I did not utter a single syllable of protest. I did not shed a tear, nor did I offer a desperate defense of the life I had built. The time for begging for my family's basic respect had expired half a decade ago. I looked at Warren, who was still holding his hand out expectantly, waiting for my credit card to miraculously appear and absolve him of his financial recklessness. I looked at Jasmine, whose smug satisfaction was practically vibrating off her skin. I looked at Trent, a man who possessed all the unearned confidence of mediocrity, sitting there expecting a successful black woman to foot the bill for his expensive tastes. Instead of reaching for my wallet, I simply raised 2 fingers into the air. The response was instantaneous. The general manager of the restaurant, a sharp professional who knew exactly who I was, and the true extent of my portfolio practically materialized at my shoulder. My family assumed he was coming to collect my payment. Warren even tapped the mahogany table impatiently. But the manager leaned down, keeping his posture deferential, waiting for my instruction. I leaned in close to his ear, ensuring my voice was low, perfectly calm, and completely imperceptible to the 36 grinning faces staring at me. I whispered exactly 3 sentences. "I am the silent majority owner of this restaurant group. Comp my sparkling water and drop the $6,700 check directly in my father's lap. If they cannot pay the balance in full, lock the front doors and call the Atlanta Police Department." The manager did not miss a beat. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but his training held firm. He gave a crisp, respectful nod, understanding the absolute severity of my command. He took a step back, folding his hands behind his back, and retreated toward the kitchen to execute my orders. I turned my attention back to the chaotic table. Warren was still smirking, completely oblivious to the trap that had just snapped shut around his ankles. Jasmine was whispering something to Trent, both of them looking at me with thinly veiled contempt, completely certain they had won this twisted power play. I smoothly stood up from my chair and brushed an invisible speck of dust from my custom-tailored cashmere coat. I offered the room a perfectly polished, entirely hollow smile. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone," I announced, my voice carrying clearly over the lingering clatter of silverware and clinking glasses. "I am just going to step out to the restroom to touch up my lipstick. I will be right back." I turned on my heel and walked out of the private banquet room. I did not run. I did not look back. I glided down the opulent corridor, past the bustling hostess stand, and straight out the heavy front doors into the crisp, humid Atlanta night. The valet saw me approaching and instantly brought my vehicle around. I handed him a crisp $100 bill slid into the plush, leather-back seat of my chauffeur-driven Maybach and told my driver to take me home. The ride back to my private gated community in Buckhead was profoundly peaceful. I watched the vibrant city lights blur past the tinted windows, feeling an immense heavy weight lift off my shoulders. For 5 years, a small, guilty fraction of my heart had wondered if cutting my family off had been too harsh a reaction to their toxicity. Tonight, they had handed me the absolute validation I needed. They had not invited me to make amends. They had invited me to make a payment. They wanted to maintain their illusion of wealth and status for their church friends, and I was merely the bank they intended to rob. 30 minutes later, I walked into my penthouse. The space was a sanctuary of modern art, floor-to-ceiling windows, and absolute silence. I walked into my kitchen, pressed the button on my espresso machine, and began crafting a macchiato. It was precisely then that the explosion happened. My phone, which had remained perfectly silent during my ride home, suddenly lit up like a distress beacon. I set my device down on the glass coffee table in my living room and watched the notifications pile up on the screen in a relentless, frantic cascade of panic. The reality of the $6,700 bill had clearly landed on Warren's lap. There were 14 missed calls from Warren in the span of 10 minutes, 8 missed calls from Brenda, dozens of frantic text messages from cousins demanding to know where I went and why the waitstaff was suddenly refusing to let anyone leave the private room. I slowly scrolled through the messages, sipping my coffee, savoring the sheer terror radiating from the digital text. Warren's messages shifted rapidly from arrogant demands to outright panic. "Get back here right now. They are not letting us leave the room. Camille, this is not funny. The manager is talking about calling the authorities. You need to pay this right now." Brenda's messages were a predictable masterclass in emotional manipulation, dripping with desperate guilt trips designed to break my resolve. "How could you do this to your own parents? Your aunt is crying in the corner. We do not have the limit on our credit cards to cover this amount. Please come back to the restaurant. We will pay you back, I promise. Just fix this." I did not respond to a single one. I simply took another slow sip of my coffee, letting them stew in the inescapable consequences of their own gluttony. They had deliberately ordered the imported lobster. They had demanded the bone in Wagyu. They had savored the $300 bottles of wine. Now they could figure out how to digest the bill without my black card to save them. Then a final, aggressively hostile text notification chimed. It was from Trent, my arrogant brother-in-law, the man who had mocked my business contracts and questioned my financial literacy just an hour earlier, was now losing his mind in the group chat. "You absolute psycho, Trent," wrote the digital words, practically vibrating with rage. "The cops are literally walking through the front doors of the restaurant right now. They are threatening to arrest Warren for theft of services. Pay this bill over the phone right this second, or I swear I will ruin your little public relations business tomorrow morning. I will go to the press. You messed with the wrong guy." I stared at his threat, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Trent thought he was dealing with an emotional, easily intimidated woman who would crumble at the first sign of a threat from a man in a suit. He had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. He did not realize he was threatening a crisis management executive who made a highly lucrative living, destroying men far more powerful, wealthy, and dangerous than a middle management finance employee. I set my coffee mug down on the table, picked up my phone, and typed my first and only response of the night directly into the group chat, ensuring every single family member saw it. "I suggest you check your own company's compliance records before you threaten my business, Trent. Good luck with the police." I hit send, switched my phone to silent, and tossed it onto the sofa. The trap had been expertly sprung, and the illusion of their perfect family was currently being dismantled by the authorities. But I knew this was just the opening move. The real war to protect my peace and my empire was only just beginning. I watched the screen illuminate my darkened living room. The silence of my penthouse was absolute, broken only by the continuous frantic buzzing against the glass coffee table. I took a slow sip of my macchiato. The espresso was perfect, bitter and rich, a sharp contrast to the sugary, desperate manipulation flooding my notifications. I picked up the device, leaning back into the deep velvet of my sofa, and watched my family's fabricated empire begin to crack in real time. Warren was the first to break. His messages arrived in rapid, aggressive bursts, fully displaying the arrogant entitlement he had wielded over me since childhood. "Get back here right now," his first text read. The timestamp showed it was sent exactly 3 minutes after my exit. "They are not letting us leave the room. Stop playing games, Camille." 2 minutes later, his tone shifted from irritation to rising panic. "This is not funny. The manager is standing at the door. He says the bill is $6,700. You know I just put the church renovation on my primary card. You need to pay this right now. Do not embarrass me in front of Pastor Miller." I smiled, tracing the warm rim of my coffee mug. Warren always played the generous philanthropist at his megachurch, writing massive checks for building funds to secure his seat at the elders' table while quietly drowning in high-interest debt. He expected his daughters to fund his actual life. Jasmine and Trent relied on him, and he relied on me. It was a parasitic ecosystem, and I had just definitively cut off the host. Brenda's messages followed quickly, a predictable masterclass in emotional terrorism. She never used outright anger when weaponized guilt was available. "How could you do this to your own parents?" she wrote, the digital words practically dripping with manufactured tears. "Your Aunt Denise is crying in the corner. Her blood pressure is acting up. We do not have the limit on our credit cards to cover this amount. Please come back, Camille. We will pay you back, I promise. Just fix this." I read the words and felt a profound, absolute emptiness. Brenda had made the exact same promise when I was 22, fresh out of college and struggling to launch my firm. She had begged me to co-sign a personal loan for Malik, swearing on a Bible they would cover the monthly payments. They missed the very first month, destroying my credit score and nearly forcing me into bankruptcy before my career even started. I spent 3 brutal years digging myself out of that financial grave while Malik drove a leased sports car they paid for. "Family takes care of each other," she had told me then, just as she had tonight. But in Brenda's dictionary, family only meant Jasmine, Malik, and Warren. I was just an ATM with a pulse. I scrolled past her pleas, watching the group chat ignite. Jasmine had taken over her texts laced with the vicious venom she usually reserved for customer service workers who did not bow fast enough. "You are a bitter, lonely woman," Cammy Jasmine texted. "Trent and I are trying to figure this out, but our cards are maxed from the boat down payment. Dad is literally shaking. If he has a heart attack, this is on you. You have always been jealous of us because you cannot keep a man." Jealous. I looked around my sprawling penthouse. The custom artwork on the walls, the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, the peace that came from knowing nobody could take a single inch of it from me. Jasmine lived in a house Warren secretly mortgaged, drove a luxury SUV Trent leased, and wore designer clothes she could not actually afford. She was entirely dependent on men who were entirely dependent on debt. There was nothing in her life to be jealous of, only a cautionary tale to aggressively avoid. The buzzing stopped for exactly 4 minutes. I imagined the chaotic scene unfolding at Prime 88. The heavy double doors of the private banquet room securely closed. The general manager, polite but utterly immovable, standing squarely by the exit. The 36 family members rapidly checking their banking apps, whispering furiously to each other, realizing that not a single one of them possessed the liquid capital to cover a luxury dinner. The sheer suffocating embarrassment of the church elders witnessing Warren's complete financial impotence. Then the final notification pierced the quiet of my living room. It was not a text from my parents or my sister. It was a direct message from Trent, the golden son-in-law, the middle management corporate finance broker who loved to casually dismiss my success as the result of diversity quotas rather than raw, undeniable talent. I opened the message. His words practically vibrated with uncontrolled rage, completely stripped of his usual condescending country club politeness. "You absolute psycho," Trent wrote. "The cops are literally walking through the front doors of the restaurant right now. The manager actually called them. They are threatening to arrest Warren for theft of services. You need to pay this bill over the phone right this second." I took another sip of my macchiato. The police presence was standard protocol for unpaid bills over $5,000 at Prime 88. I had written the corporate policy myself. Trent's message continued, escalating from frantic demands to outright threats. "If you do not handle this immediately, I swear to God I will ruin your little PR business tomorrow morning. I will go to the press. I will tell all my corporate contacts how you treat your own family. I will make sure you lose every major account you have. You messed with the wrong guy, Camille. I will destroy you." I stared at the glowing screen. A slow, dangerous laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the empty room. Trent thought he was dealing with an emotional, easily intimidated woman who would crumble the moment a man in a suit raised his voice. He fundamentally misunderstood the predator he was threatening. I am a crisis management executive. I do not just manage corporate scandals. I control the flow of information. I make a highly lucrative living protecting corporate titans from their own catastrophic mistakes, and when necessary, I surgically annihilate the reputations of anyone standing in my client's way. I held the dirty secrets of half the executives in Atlanta. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried because I was usually the one hired to pave over the graves. Trent was a mid-level vice president at a regional wealth management firm. He had no real power, only the fragile illusion of it. And what he did not know, what he could not possibly fathom, as he stood in that restaurant threatening me, was that I already held the keys to his professional execution. I set my coffee mug down on the glass table. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard. I did not justify my actions. I did not apologize. I did not ask about Warren's blood pressure or Brenda's tears. I typed my first and only response of the night, sending it directly to Trent. I ensured every single word was sharp, calculated, and perfectly lethal. "I suggest you check your own company's compliance records before you threaten my business, Trent. Good luck with the police." I hit send. I did not wait for his reply. I switched my phone to silent, tossing it onto the velvet sofa beside me. The trap had been expertly sprung. The authorities were dealing with the fallout of their gluttony, and the illusion of my family's wealth had been publicly, irreparably shattered. But as I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering expanse of the city, I knew this was merely the opening skirmish. Trent would not let this go. Jasmine would demand aggressive retaliation. Warren and Brenda would mobilize their church circles to paint me as the vindictive villain. They would wage a desperate war to protect their bruised egos and their fragile financial lives. They had spent my entire life underestimating me, expecting me to eventually fold under the weight of family obligation. Tomorrow morning, they would wake up and realize they had finally pushed me past the point of return. The real war was only just beginning, and I was fully prepared to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported hardwood floors. I stood in my kitchen, wrapped in a silk robe, watching the city of Atlanta wake up far below me. My espresso machine hummed quietly, a soothing counterpoint to the relentless, aggressive vibrating of my phone on the marble island. I had left the device on silent, but the screen flashed continuously, a strobe light of escalating panic and venom. I took my time. I poured my coffee, inhaled the rich aroma, and finally picked up the phone. "I am a crisis management executive. I have faced down international press corps, hostile boardrooms, and federal investigators. I know exactly how a smear campaign is built, and I was about to watch a masterclass in amateur defamation orchestrated by my own blood." I opened social media. My sister Jasmine had not wasted a single second. While Warren and Brenda were likely still hyperventilating over the legal and financial ramifications of the restaurant bill, Jasmine had immediately weaponized her only real asset, her online audience. She fancied herself a lifestyle influencer, boasting a following built on the carefully curated illusion of a perfect, wealthy, devout Southern family. Now she was using that platform to launch a full-scale digital assault. The video was posted at 6 in the morning, meticulously staged and heavily filtered to project maximum vulnerability. Jasmine sat on the floor of her unnecessarily large suburban home, wearing an oversized neutral-colored sweater. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her makeup was expertly applied to look as though she had been weeping for hours. She had even set up a soft ring light to catch the perfect glisten of her manufactured tears. I hit play, watching her face contort into an expression of profound, fabricated agony. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Jasmine began, her voice trembling with practiced precision. "But my heart is completely broken this morning. Last night, my older sister Camille committed an act of unbelievable cruelty against our family, against our elderly parents." I took a slow sip of my coffee, marveling at her audacity. Warren and Brenda were in their early 60s, regularly played tennis, and possessed the energy to orchestrate massive social events, but Jasmine was suddenly painting them as frail, helpless victims. We invited Camille to a beautiful family dinner to heal old wounds. Jasmine continued, wiping a single strategic tear from her cheek. "We just wanted to love her. But instead, she lured us into an incredibly expensive restaurant, ordered thousands of dollars worth of food and liquor to show off her wealth, and then she vanished. She abandoned us. She left our elderly parents trapped with a bill they could not pay, completely humiliating them in front of our entire family." Jasmine leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping to a dramatic, breathless whisper. "This is financial abuse. This is elder abuse. Camille has become so obsessed with her money, so consumed by her corporate status, that she has completely forgotten where she came from. She wanted to see our father arrested. She wanted to destroy us. Please pray for my family today. Pray for Camille, that God softens her bitter, hardened heart." The video faded to black. I sat perfectly still, analyzing the performance, not as a sister, but as a public relations expert. It was a textbook manipulation tactic. She hit all the correct emotional triggers: victimhood, religious piety, and the shock value of a wealthy family member turning their back on their humble roots. She conveniently omitted the fact that they had ambushed me, that they had ordered the expensive champagne long before I arrived, and that they had explicitly demanded I pay for their gluttony to fund their fake lifestyle. The fallout was immediate and visceral. The comment section under her video was a toxic wasteland of judgment and righteous indignation. But the real assault was happening directly in my personal inbox. Jasmine had successfully mobilized the flying monkeys of our extended family and their vast church network. The very people who had watched Warren and Brenda mistreat me for decades were now lining up to cast the first stone. My messages were flooded with vitriol from church aunties, distant cousins, and women who used prayer emojis as weapons. A message from Auntie Denise, the choir director, read, "I cannot believe you would treat the mother and father who gave you life this way. God sees your wicked heart, Camille. You cannot buy your way into heaven." A text from a cousin I had not spoken to since high school read, "You really think you are better than everyone else just because you have a little money now? Humiliating Uncle Warren like that is disgusting. You are a disgrace to this family." Message after message piled up, calling me heartless, arrogant, and evil. They accused me of financial abuse, of flaunting my wealth, of abandoning the village that raised me. They demanded I publicly apologize and immediately pay the restaurant bill to save my parents from legal ruin. The hypocrisy was staggering. These were the same people who turned a blind eye when Warren drained my savings, the same people who applauded when Brenda paraded Jasmine around as the perfect daughter while treating me like an inconvenient secret. They only cared about family loyalty when it involved protecting the abusers. I set the phone down and walked into my master bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I did not shed a tear. I had cried all my tears for these people in my 20s, sobbing alone in cramped apartments, while they took family vacations they deliberately hid from me. The well was completely dry. Now there was only a cold, sharp clarity. I walked back to the kitchen and noticed a new voicemail notification. It was from Malik. My older brother usually avoided direct conflict, preferring to hide in the shadows, while Warren and Jasmine fought the battles. If he was calling, it meant the panic in their camp had reached a fever pitch. He was likely desperate to secure his own financial lifeline, knowing that if Warren went down, his free ride was over. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. The audio was crackling with background noise sounding like a busy street, or perhaps the casino floor where he spent most of his borrowed money. Malik did not bother with a greeting. His voice was loud, erratic, and dripping with defensive venom. "You think you are so smart?" Camille Malik spat into the receiver, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You think leaving us at that restaurant makes you look powerful? It just makes you look pathetic. Everyone knows why you are really doing this. You have always been jealous of Jasmine." I closed my eyes, letting the sheer absurdity of his words wash over me. "You have always been jealous of Jasmine because she got married first, and Dad actually wanted to walk her down the aisle. You are just a bitter, lonely workaholic trying to buy respect. You have no one, Camille. Nobody actually loves you. They just tolerate you because you have money. You better fix this mess with the police right now, or I swear I will make sure nobody in this city ever looks at you the same way again." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I stood in the silence of my kitchen, the echoes of Malik's desperate, vicious words ringing in my ears. He had aimed for the jugular, using the one weapon they always relied on to keep me in line, my supposed lack of traditional value. In their twisted worldview, a woman was only worth something if she was chosen by a man, preferably a man Warren could control or brag about. Malik bringing up the wedding aisle was a deliberate, calculated strike at a very old wound. Years ago, when Jasmine married Trent, Warren had transformed into the ultimate proud patriarch. He spent tens of thousands of dollars he did not have beaming as he walked his compliant, submissive golden child down the aisle. He had made a grand speech at the reception about how Jasmine was the perfect example of a dutiful daughter. In contrast, Warren had always made it abundantly clear that he found my independence offensive. He resented that I did not need his money, that I did not seek his approval, and that I refused to marry the mediocre men he tried to set me up with from his congregation. Malik thought reminding me of that rejection would break my spirit. He thought calling me a bitter, lonely workaholic would force me to desperately seek their validation by paying their debts. He was incredibly, fatally mistaken. I did not feel lonely. I felt an overwhelming sense of power. Malik's voicemail, Jasmine's tearful video, the frantic messages from the church ladies, it was all noise. It was the desperate, thrashing flail of a dying system realizing it had lost control of its primary resource. They thought they could shame me into submission. They thought they could wage a public relations war against a woman who literally dictated the news cycle for a living. I walked over to my home office, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and woke up my dual monitor setup. The screen cast a cool blue light across my face. I had let them have their morning of public outrage. I had let Jasmine collect her sympathetic comments and her fake internet points. I had allowed them to escalate the situation, giving them just enough rope to completely entangle themselves. Now it was my turn to speak. I was not going to record a tearful response video. I was not going to argue with the choir director in my direct messages. I was going to execute a surgical strike that would instantly and permanently dismantle the foundation of their entire existence. I reached for my encrypted hard drive, ready to deploy the very weapon they never knew existed. The sun begins to bleed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, casting long, sharp shadows across my desk. I am not angry anymore. Anger is an undisciplined emotion, a liability that sloppy people use to make careless mistakes. Jasmine and Malik are sloppy. They let their emotions drive their actions, splashing their insecurities across the internet for cheap sympathy and fleeting validation. I operate on a completely different frequency. I am a crisis management architect. I do not engage in digital screaming matches. I do not defend my character in the comment section of a heavily filtered social media post. I neutralize threats with absolute overwhelming leverage. I pull up Jasmine's social media profiles on my secondary monitor. Her tearful video has already amassed thousands of views. The comments are a predictable echo chamber of church elders and country club wives praising her bravery and condemning my sudden cruel wealth. Jasmine's entire existence is built on the fragile architecture of public perception. She needs her country club circle to believe she is wealthy, devout, and flawless. She relies on Trent's local status to maintain her position on the charity boards. Image is her only currency. Take away her image and she is entirely bankrupt. I open the encrypted vault on my primary server. Inside is a folder I created 7 years ago labeled simply with Warren's initials. I click open a specific document that has been waiting patiently for this exact moment. It is a complete, unredacted financial ledger from the regional bank Warren used for decades. 7 years ago, I sat in a cramped financial aid office at my university, a desperate college student being told that my tuition savings account was completely empty. $40,000 money I had contributed to from my own part-time jobs alongside the small college fund my late grandmother had left me was simply gone. When I confronted Warren, he did not flinch. He told me the family had hit hard times and needed the liquidity to survive. He told me to take out student loans, claiming that carrying debt builds character and work ethic. 2 months later, Jasmine married Trent in a $50,000 country club extravaganza. There were imported peonies covering every surface, massive ice sculptures, and a 5-course plated dinner. I ate the dry chicken at table 12 and smiled for the photographer. But the following week, when Warren asked me to help organize his tax documents because his vision was blurring, I found the bank transfer slips. He had not used my money to save the family from ruin. He had transferred the exact balance of my education fund directly to the Oak Creek Country Club event management department. He sold my future to buy Jasmine a party so he could show off to Trent's wealthy parents. I did not scream or cry when I found those documents. I quietly scanned them, saved the routing numbers, captured Warren's signature authorizing the transfer, and locked the file away. I knew even then that a day of reckoning would come. I attach this single file to a new email. I leave the body of the email completely blank. The subject line reads simply, Oak Creek Country Club Ledger. I type in Jasmine's email address and hit send. I watch the digital clock on my monitor. I wait exactly 60 seconds to ensure the email hits her server. Then I pick up my phone and dial her number. She answers on the second ring. Her voice is thick with manufactured exhaustion, clearly expecting me to beg for mercy after seeing her viral video. Camille. She sighs dramatically, her tone dripping with absolute condescension. I really do not want to hear your excuses right now. The family is in shambles because of your selfish behavior last night. Dad is beside himself. Trent is talking to lawyers about what you did at the restaurant. I hope you saw my video. People need to know the truth about who you really are. I do not raise my voice. I speak with the clinical detached precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. Open your email, Jasmine. She pauses clearly, thrown off by my absolute calm. What? I am not playing games with you, Camille. You need to apologize to Mom and Dad right now and pay that bill. I said open your email. I repeat. My voice dropping an octave, radiating pure cold authority. I will wait. I hear the muffled sound of her putting the phone on speaker. I hear the rapid clicking of her laptop keys. A few seconds pass in absolute silence. Then I hear a sharp, sudden intake of breath. It is the distinct, unmistakable sound of a woman watching her entire fabricated reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. The document you are looking at is the bank transfer ledger from 7 years ago. I tell her my words crisp and sharp in the quiet room. It details the exact moment Warren drained $40,000 from my college savings account and wired it directly to Oak Creek Country Club to fund your extravagant dream wedding. The wedding you have spent years bragging about. The wedding that established your elite social standing with Trent's wealthy friends. Camille. Where did you get this? She stammers. her voice completely stripped of its former arrogance. Her breathing accelerates, turning short and panicked. Dad said he paid for the wedding from his investments. He told me his real estate deals covered it. You are lying. This is fake. It has the official bank watermarks and Warren's physical signature authorizing the wire. I reply smoothly, leaning back in my chair. You can try to play the ignorant victim, Jasmine, but Trent's golf buddies and your junior league friends are not going to care what Warren told you. All they are going to see is that the glamorous, privileged life you constantly flaunt was subsidized by your black sister's stolen tuition money. They will see that Trent, the great corporate provider, let his father-in-law rob a college student to pay for his open bar. Jasmine begins to hyperventilate. I can hear her gasping for air over the phone, the sheer terror of public humiliation closing in on her throat. Trent's family comes from old generational wealth. They already looked down on Jasmine for her lack of pedigree. If they found out her fairy tale wedding was funded by theft, she would be permanently exiled from their social circles. Trent would be the laughingstock of his finance firm. Cammy, please. She begs, the word cracking in half as genuine tears finally start to fall. You cannot show this to Trent. He would lose his mind. The country club board would ruin me. Please, I swear I did not know he took your money. I swear it. You have exactly 5 minutes, I command, cutting through her pathetic sobs with zero remorse. Take the video down. Delete every post, every comment, every tearful lie you published this morning. If that video is still live in 5 minutes and 1 second, I will hit send on a mass email containing this ledger. It will go to Trent's managing partner, the president of Oak Creek Country Club, the head of the junior league, and every single person who attended your fraudulent wedding. But Cammy, I already have thousands of views. People will ask questions if I just delete it without an explanation. She cries wildly, panic making her voice pitch higher. Figure it out, I reply coldly. You have 4 minutes and 40 seconds left. I terminate the call. I do not stay on the line to listen to her panic or her hollow apologies. I turn my attention back to my secondary monitor, bringing up her social media page. I hit the refresh button. For 2 agonizing minutes, the tearful, heavily filtered video remains at the top of her feed. The comment count continues to tick upward as her loyal followers demand my head on a platter. I pick up my coffee mug, taking a slow, satisfying sip, completely unbothered by the ticking clock. If she tests my resolve, I will gladly press send on that mass email. I have absolutely no loyalty left to protect her fragile ego or her fake marriage. I hit refresh again at the 3-minute mark. The screen goes blank for a fraction of a second. When the page reloads, the video is gone. The post is gone. Her entire social media grid has been abruptly switched from public to private mode. The digital smear campaign vanishes into the ether, erased by the very hands that enthusiastically built it just hours before. I smile, setting my mug down on the desk. The golden child has been permanently silenced, but Trent is still entirely unaware of the storm heading his way. The digital silence following the deletion of Jasmine's video was exquisite. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my mahogany desk, and watched the empty space where my sister's fabricated tears had been broadcasting just moments before. She had folded in under 3 minutes. It was almost disappointing how little stamina she possessed when confronted with the truth. But the satisfaction was brief, interrupted by the sharp, demanding ring of my private office line. I glanced at the caller ID. The screen displayed the main corporate switchboard number for Sterling and Vance Wealth Management. Trent. He was calling from his office, likely pacing behind the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of his corner suite, trying to project the image of a formidable executive handling a minor inconvenience. I let it ring 3 times, allowing his blood pressure to spike just a fraction higher before lifting the receiver. I did not say a word. I simply breathed into the speaker, waiting for him to step into the arena. Listen to me very carefully, Camille. Trent barked, his voice vibrating with a toxic mixture of panic and deep-seated patriarchal arrogance. I do not know what kind of forged fake document you just sent my wife, but she is currently locked in our master bathroom having a full-blown panic attack. You have lost your absolute mind. I remained perfectly silent, spinning a heavy gold pen between my fingers. Trent took my silence for submission and immediately pressed his perceived advantage. He dropped his voice an octave, attempting to sound like the commanding patriarch Warren always pretended to be. "You think you are so clever?" Trent sneered, the polished country club veneer completely peeling away to reveal the ugly racist entitlement beneath. "You get a little boutique PR firm, land a few decent contracts because these corporations are desperate to fill their diversity quotas, and suddenly you think you can play with the big boys. You think you understand leverage. You are a lucky diversity hire with a massive chip on her shoulder, Camille. You have zero concept of how real wealth operates." He paused, taking a sharp breath, feeding on his own manufactured outrage. "Real wealth protects its own." He continued, his tone turning dangerously low. "You attacking Warren over some ancient misunderstood bank transfer just proves you have an urban ghetto mentality. You want to drag this family into the mud because you cannot stand that Jasmine belongs in a world you will never truly fit into. You are a bitter, lonely woman who cannot buy class. Now you are going to call Jasmine, you are going to apologize for whatever fake ledger you sent her, and you are going to wire the money for last night's dinner to my account. If you refuse, I will personally make a few calls to the senior partners at my firm. We control millions in corporate investments across Atlanta. I will ensure your little agency is blacklisted before lunch." I let him finish. I let him empty his entire magazine of racial coding, condescension, and empty threats. I listened to his heavy breathing through the receiver, picturing his smug, flushed face. He genuinely believed he had just delivered a fatal blow. He believed his position as a middle management vice president at a regional finance firm made him a god. I set my gold pen down on the desk. The soft click echoed in my silent office. A slow, dark laugh bubbled up from the back of my throat. It was not a loud or hysterical sound. It was the quiet, chilling chuckle of an executioner verifying the target was locked in the crosshairs. "Real wealth, Trent?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, smooth, and utterly devoid of emotion. Trent hesitated, clearly unnerved by the total lack of fear in my response. "Do not play games with me, Camille. I am warning you. Is that why your firm's senior managing partner, Richard Sterling, retained my agency at exactly 6:00 this morning to manage the fallout of a massive internal embezzlement scandal?" I asked, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "A scandal involving a certain white vice president who just bought a 70-foot boat he absolutely could not afford on his base salary." Dead silence descended on the line. The ambient background noise of his corporate office seemed to evaporate. I could almost hear the blood draining from his face, rushing straight to the floor. I did not give him a second to recover. I drove the blade in deeper, twisting it with expert accuracy. "You see, Trent, when Richard Sterling discovered that someone had been skimming client funds through dummy offshore LLCs, for the past 14 months he panicked. He knew the SEC would tear his firm apart if the news leaked before he had a containment strategy. So he did what powerful men always do when their empires are threatened. He bypassed the mediocre white men in his boardroom and called the single best crisis management executive in the Southeast. He called the lucky diversity hire, Camille." Trent gasped, the sound barely more than a wet, strangling wheeze. I opened the second encrypted file on my desktop, the screen illuminated with bank statements, wire transfers, and internal corporate emails. "Richard sent me the preliminary audit file at 6:15 this morning." I continued, my voice gliding over the facts like ice. "He hired me to control the media narrative, to frame this as an isolated incident by a rogue, greedy employee so the firm could save its reputation." As I was sipping my morning espresso, I started reviewing the rogue employee's transaction history. And what did I find, Trent? I found $340,000 funneled into a shell corporation registered in Delaware. I found a wire transfer for a boat down payment. And ironically, I found a desperate, frantic text message from that same employee threatening to destroy my business over a $6,000 restaurant bill. "I am so sorry," Trent whimpered. His voice had completely shattered. He sounded like a terrified child. The commanding racist executive from 2 minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a man staring directly into the abyss of federal prison. "Camille." Please. Listen to me. Please do not do this. I can put the money back. I have bonuses coming. I can fix this. You cannot fix anything. I replied, my tone flattening into absolute indifference. You are already a ghost. I will pay you back the 40,000 Warren took from you. Trent babbled, his panic escalating into hyperventilation. I will make Jasmine call you and apologize on her knees. I will pay for the dinner at Prime 88 right now. Just tell Richard it is a misunderstanding. You control the narrative. You can spin this. Please, Camille, I have a family. I have a reputation. Your reputation was a hallucination funded by stolen money, I stated coldly. Just like your wedding. Just like your boat. You and Jasmine are perfectly matched, Trent. You are both empty vessels parading around in stolen luxury, looking down on the people you robbed to survive. You thought you could treat me like a subordinate. You thought you could use my race, my gender, and my single status as weapons to keep me beneath your heel. But you forgot one crucial detail about people who build their own empires from scratch. We do not fear the mud. We own the ground you walk on. Camille. I am begging you, he sobbed openly into the receiver. Look out your glass walls, Trent, I commanded. What, he choked out. Look out your office walls right now, I repeated. I heard the rustle of fabric as he presumably turned toward his office door. A ragged, terrifying gasp echoed through the phone. Do you see them? I asked gently. Do you see Richard Sterling walking off the elevator with the two gentlemen in cheap federal suits? They are not here to discuss your quarterly projections. They are here to escort you out of the building in handcuffs. My media strategy dictates that the firm must be seen cooperating fully and aggressively with law enforcement. We are making a public spectacle of your arrest to ensure the clients know the rot has been removed. No, no, no! Trent chanted, the sound dissolving into pure primal panic. Camille, please, they are walking toward my door. Help me. You are family. You lost the right to use that word a long time ago, I replied. Enjoy your new reality, Trent. I hear the federal holding cells are severely lacking in country club amenities. I pressed the end call button. The line went dead. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the deep, profound silence of my office wash over me. I turned my attention to the Newswire tracking application on my third monitor. In exactly 15 minutes, my agency would release the official press statement detailing the arrest of a rogue executive at Sterling and Vance Wealth Management. By noon, Trent's mugshot would be broadcasting across every local news station in Atlanta. Jasmine was about to find out that the ledger I sent her was the least of her problems. Her cars would be seized, her bank accounts would be frozen by federal investigators, and her entire social circle would instantly violently excommunicate her. The golden couple of the family was officially dead. But my work was not finished. Trent was merely a symptom of the disease. The root of the infection was still sitting in a comfortable suburban house, likely complaining to Pastor Miller about his ungrateful daughter. Warren had taught his children that theft was acceptable as long as it funded the illusion of superiority. He had sacrificed my future to buy his favorite child a crown. It was time to show Warren exactly what happens when the scapegoat decides to become the butcher. I pulled up my secure communication portal and drafted a message to the lead investigative reporter at the Atlanta Chronicle. It was time to discuss a mega-church building fund. The morning news cycle was a flawlessly orchestrated symphony. I sat at my kitchen island, a fresh espresso in hand, watching the local anchor detail the shocking arrest of Trent Lawson, a mid-level vice president at Sterling and Vance Wealth Management. The B-roll footage showed Trent being escorted out of his gleaming corporate building in handcuffs, his face pale and contorted in sheer terror. The news anchor read the official press release I had drafted just hours prior, praising the firm's swift, decisive action in rooting out a rogue employee who had betrayed their ethical standards. The narrative was perfectly contained. The firm was the victim, Trent was the lone villain, and my retainer fee had just been wired into my corporate account. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning when the secure intercom on my wall chimed. The sharp, persistent tone indicated a direct line from the main security gate of my private residential community. I walked over and pressed the receiver. Ms. Washington, my head of security, Marcus said. His voice was tight with professional restraint, masking obvious irritation. I apologize for the early intrusion. We have a situation at the main gate. A silver Lexus just blew past the security checkpoint by tailgating an outgoing delivery truck. We intercepted the vehicle halfway up the private drive. The driver is claiming to be your father. He is highly agitated and demanding to see you. I have patrol vehicles blocking him in. Do you want me to contact the Atlanta Police Department to have him cited for trespassing? I looked out the window down toward the winding manicured roads of the estate. Warren had finally lost his mind. The carefully constructed facade of the dignified, untouchable church elder had completely evaporated under the crushing pressure of actual consequences. No, Marcus, I replied, my voice perfectly level. Keep the police out of it for now. I do not want flashing lights disrupting the neighborhood. Hold him exactly where he is. I will be down in 3 minutes to handle the pest control myself. I did not change out of my silk lounge clothes. I simply slipped on a pair of designer slides, grabbed my access key, and took the private elevator down to the ground level. I walked out into the thick, humid morning air, making my way toward the roundabout, where Marcus and 2 other security guards had corralled a very familiar, aggressively leased Lexus SUV. Warren was standing outside the driver's side door. The sight of him was almost jarring. My father was a man who worshipped the aesthetic of wealth. He normally never left his house without a tailored suit, polished loafers, and an air of absolute superiority. Today, his tie was missing. His collar was unbuttoned, and sweat beaded heavily on his forehead. He looked wild, desperate, and entirely stripped of his power. As soon as he saw me approaching, he lunged forward, only to be immediately blocked by Marcus's outstretched arm. "Tell your hired thugs to back off, Camille," Warren shouted, his voice cracking with unfiltered rage. "I am your father. You do not treat me like some common criminal." "You broke into a highly secured private community by tailgating an Amazon truck," Warren Weiss stated, stopping a comfortable 10 feet away from him. "That is the exact definition of a common criminal. State your business and leave before I have you arrested." Warren scoffed a desperate, ugly sound. He reached into his vehicle and pulled out a thick, disorganized stack of papers stapled together in the corner. He waved them in the air like a weapon, stepping as close to Marcus's arm as he dared. "I am not going anywhere until you sign these," Warren demanded, shaking the papers toward me. "You think you can just destroy this family and walk away?" Trent is sitting in a federal holding cell. His bail is set at $250,000, and his accounts are completely frozen. Malik has bookies threatening to break his legs by Friday because he promised them we were coming into money. You did this. You orchestrated this entire nightmare, and now you are going to fix it. I crossed my arms, looking at the papers in his hand. "And what exactly are those?" "This is a lawsuit," he spat, puffing his chest out in a pathetic attempt to establish dominance. "I spent the entire night consulting with legal professionals. I am suing you for breach of fiduciary duty. This PR firm you are running around bragging about, you built it using family resources. You built it on the back of the Washington name. That makes it a family trust. You are legally obligated to share the profits. I am demanding 30% of your company's equity to be transferred to my control immediately. That will be enough to secure a loan to bail Trent out, pay off Malik's debts, and cover the emotional distress you have caused your mother." I stared at him. For a fraction of a second, I genuinely wondered if he was experiencing a psychotic break. The sheer unadulterated delusion required to print out what looked like internet boilerplate legal forms and demand a 30% stake in a multi-million-dollar crisis management firm was staggering. He had no legal standing. He had no financial leverage. He was a drowning man trying to claim ownership of the rescue boat. Before I could verbally dissect the utter absurdity of his threat, the passenger side window of the Lexus rolled down. Brenda leaned her face toward the crack, her eyes red and puffy, her expression twisted into a mask of pure, self-righteous indignation. She had clearly abandoned her weaponized tears in favor of outright hostility. "You owe us!" Brenda yelled through the cracked window, her voice shrill and echoing across the quiet, landscaped driveway. "You owe this family everything. We kept a roof over your head. We fed you. You would not have that fancy business or this arrogant attitude if your father had not taught you discipline by charging you rent when you were a teenager. You are an ungrateful, wicked child. I shifted my gaze from Warren to the cracked window. Brenda's words hung in the humid air, a perfect crystalline distillation of their entire parenting philosophy. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. Marcus tensed, ready to intervene, but I raised a single finger to hold him back. I looked directly at the dark tint of the passenger window, speaking with a volume that was low, precise, and absolutely lethal. You charged me $600 a month to sleep in my own childhood bedroom when I was 16 years old, I said, my voice slicing through the morning air like a surgical blade. While Malik was out crashing cars, you bought for him, and Jasmine was taking dance lessons you could not afford. I was working 35 hours a week at a grocery store after school. I handed over my entire paycheck to you every single Friday just to avoid being thrown out onto the street. You did not teach me discipline, Brenda. You taught me how to survive extortion. You taught me that my only value to this family was the cash I could generate to subsidize the children you actually loved. I turned my attention back to Warren. He was gripping the fake legal documents so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His jaw was clenched, but his eyes were darting nervously, realizing that his intimidation tactics were failing spectacularly. And you... I continued, my gaze locking onto him and completely dismantling his remaining dignity. You have the absolute audacity to stand in my driveway waving internet printouts claiming my company is a family trust. You want 30% of my equity to bail out a man who stole from his own clients to buy a boat and a son who gambles away his rent money. Let me make something incredibly clear to you, Warren. I built my firm from the ground up while you were busy stealing my $40,000 college fund to pay for Jasmine's wedding. You have zero claim to my assets. You have zero legal standing. Any lawyer who looks at those papers will laugh you right out of their office. Warren's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. I will take you to court, Camille. I will drag your name through the mud. I will tell every client you have that you are a thief and a liar. You will do absolutely nothing, I countered smoothly, stepping right up to the invisible line Marcus maintained. Because if you file a single piece of paper against my company, I will unleash a legal and public relations nightmare that will bury you so deep you will never see daylight again. You are worried about Trent's bail and Malik's bookies. You need to start worrying about yourself. Warren blinked, the threat momentarily overriding his anger. What are you talking about? I smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow expression. I know about the church building fund, Warren, I said softly. The color instantly vanished from his face. The aggressive posture completely collapsed, his shoulders dropping as if he had been physically struck. I know that the $300,000 the congregation raised to build the new youth center has been slowly siphoned into a shadow account. For the past 4 years, I continued watching his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated horror. I know that as the head of the finance committee, you had sole authorization over those transfers. And what you do not know, because you are too busy tailgating delivery trucks to secure 30% of a company you will never touch, is that I spent an hour last night having a very productive conversation with the lead investigative reporter at the Atlanta Chronicle. Warren took a stumbling step backward, his back hitting the side of his leased Lexus. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization was finally settling in. He had come to my house expecting to bully a compliant daughter into saving his fake empire. Instead, he had walked directly into a heavily armed trap. They are pulling the tax records this morning, I informed him, my voice completely devoid of mercy. Pastor Miller is going to get a very interesting phone call before noon. By the end of the week, the congregation will know exactly where their tithes went. You are not going to get 30% of my company, Warren. You are going to need every single penny you can scrape together to hire a defense attorney who can keep you out of the same federal facility Trent is currently sitting in. I turned my back on him. I looked at my head of security. Marcus, I said clearly, if this vehicle is not off the premises in exactly 60 seconds, call the police and press full charges for trespassing and harassment. Do not let them back through those gates under any circumstances. Understood, Ms. Washington, Marcus replied, signaling to the other guards to move in. I walked back toward the private elevator. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not listen to the frantic, muffled arguing suddenly erupting from inside the Lexus. The parasite had been completely severed. The host was finally free. I stand before the stainless steel doors of my private elevator, my finger hovering over the call button. The adrenaline of our phone confrontation still hums in my veins, but a cold, heavy realization washes over me. Sending Warren away, now letting him stew in his own panicked ignorance at the security gate, is far too merciful. He needs to see the architecture of his ruin up close. He needs to hold the instruments of his destruction in his own hands. I press the communication button on my security earpiece. Marcus, stand down. Open the main gates. Let them pull directly into my driveway. Marcus hesitates for a fraction of a second before his professional training kicks in. Copy that, Ms. Washington. I turn away from the elevator and walk back into my executive home office. I bypass the standard filing cabinets and move directly to the floor safe hidden beneath a heavy mahogany side table. I enter the biometric code, open the heavy steel door, and retrieve a specific thick black portfolio from the bottom shelf. This portfolio has been waiting patiently for 3 years. I carry it out the front doors of my home, stepping onto the imported Italian slate of my circular driveway to wait. The silver Lexus roars up the private road, taking the final curve far too fast. The tires squeal aggressively as Warren slams on the brakes, halting the vehicle just inches from the edge of my manicured lawn. He thinks he has won. He thinks my decision to open the gates means I have surrendered to his pathetic bluffs. Before the car even comes to a complete halt, the passenger door flies open. Brenda storms out, her heels clicking violently against the slate. Her face is twisted into a mask of bitter, righteous indignation. She has clearly abandoned her weaponized tears in favor of outright hostility. "You owe us!" Brenda yells through the cracked window of the car, before she even fully steps out. Her voice shrill and echoing across the quiet landscaped driveway. "You owe this family everything. We kept a roof over your head. We fed you. You would not have that fancy business or this arrogant attitude if your father had not taught you discipline by charging you rent when you were a teenager. You are a wicked, ungrateful child." Warren steps out of the driver's side, adjusting his suit jacket, his confidence artificially inflated by his wife's screeching. He approaches me with a thick, disorganized stack of papers stapled together in the corner. He waves them in the air like a weapon, puffing his chest out in a pathetic attempt to establish dominance. "This is a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty," Camille Warren demands, thrusting the papers toward me. "You built your little PR firm using family resources. You built it on the back of the Washington name. That makes it a family trust. I am demanding 30% of your company's equity to be transferred to my control immediately. That will be enough to secure a loan to bail Trent out and pay off Malik's debts. You are going to sign this today, or I will have a judge freeze your entire operation by tomorrow morning." I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice. I simply look at them. They are two pathetic parasites clinging to the absolute delusion of their own supremacy. I look at Brenda, whose entire worldview is built on the myth of her own maternal sacrifice. "You charge me rent," I state, my voice cutting through the humid morning air with surgical precision. "You charged a 16-year-old girl $600 a month to sleep in the bed she grew up in. While Malik was out wrecking cars, you bought for him, and Jasmine was taking elite dance lessons you absolutely could not afford. I was working 35 hours a week at a grocery store after school. I handed over my entire paycheck to you every single Friday just to avoid being thrown out onto the street. You did not teach me discipline, Brenda. You taught me how to survive extortion. You taught me that my only value to this family was the cash I could generate to subsidize the children you actually loved." Brenda opens her mouth to scream another insult, but I cut her off instantly. "You taught me to protect my assets from thieves." I continue, my gaze locking onto Warren and completely dismantling his remaining dignity, and I learned that lesson flawlessly. I reach out and casually slap the stack of papers out of Warren's hand. The useless printed internet legal forms scatter across the driveway, fluttering into the pristine landscaping. He gasps, his face flushing a deep, dangerous crimson with outrage. Before he can shout, I hold up the heavy black portfolio I retrieved from my safe. I did not use a single dime of your money to build my firm, Warren. I built my empire on my own merit. But we do need to talk about fiduciary duty and family trusts, because 3 years ago, you made a catastrophic miscalculation. I watch his eyes dart to the black portfolio. I see the first flicker of genuine terror replace his manufactured bravado. 3 years ago, I continue stepping closer to him. You convinced the church elders to back your visionary commercial real estate venture. You promised them a new community center, a retail complex, and a guaranteed return on the congregation's investments. But you did not build a community center, did you, Warren? You funneled that money into terrible high-risk commercial leases. You leveraged the church's assets to the absolute breaking point to fund your own lifestyle, and then the market shifted. Warren takes a stumbling step backward. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. Brenda looks between us, her anger slowly giving way to total confusion. You were drowning, I say. My voice steady, rhythmic, relentless. The bank was preparing to call the loans. The church board was asking for a forensic audit. You were looking at 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. You were utterly ruined. And then a miracle happened. An anonymous private equity firm out of Delaware stepped in. They bought your debt. They restructured your loans. They allowed you to keep your house, your cars, and your position at the church, provided you met their strict, uncompromising monthly repayment schedule. Warren's breathing becomes incredibly shallow. He is staring at the black portfolio as if it is a venomous snake preparing to strike. You praised God for that private equity firm, I remind him, a cold, sharp smile touching the corners of my mouth. You stood at the pulpit and testified about divine intervention. You thought you outsmarted the system. You thought you were untouchable. I open the black portfolio. I pull out the original deed to his sprawling suburban mansion, the titles to the luxury cars they are currently driving, and the master promissory note bearing his frantic, desperate signature. I hold them up so he can see the raised corporate seals, the notarized stamps, and the name of the managing director of that anonymous Delaware firm. It was not a stranger, Warren, I whisper, stepping so close I can see the sweat dripping down his temples. It was my shell company. I bought your debt. I bought your fraudulent loans. The absolute devastation that hits them is biblical. Warren's knees physically buckle. He has to grab the side of the silver Lexus to keep from collapsing onto the driveway. Brenda lets out a high, thin wail, covering her mouth with both hands, as the reality of their absolute subjugation crushes the air from her lungs. You do not own 30% of my company, Warren. I state, delivering the final fatal blow with absolute authority. I own 100% of your house, your cars, and the very concrete you are standing on. You have been paying rent to me for 3 years. Warren slides down the side of the vehicle, his tailored suit wrinkling as he hits the ground. He looks up at me, his eyes wide, hollow, and completely broken. The patriarch has been entirely dismantled. Every single month when you wrote that crippling repayment check, you were paying for my success. I tell him, looking down at his pathetic, trembling form. I own your entire existence. If you ever threaten me again, if you ever show up at my property, or if you ever try to contact my agency, I will call in the entire debt immediately. You will be evicted from my house by the end of the week, and I will hand these files directly to the federal prosecutor handling Trent's embezzlement case. Brenda is sobbing uncontrollably now, leaning against the hood of the car. The arrogant, demanding woman who had just screamed at me through a cracked window is gone, replaced by a terrified tenant who realizes she is entirely at the mercy of her landlord. Get off my property, I command, turning my back on them and walking toward my front doors. And make sure my rent check is on time on the 1st of the month. I do not tolerate late payments. The drive from my private estate to my downtown office was a masterclass in tranquility. I watched the Atlanta skyline rise against the morning sun, feeling the profound, intoxicating weight of absolute victory. Warren and Brenda were effectively neutralized, trapped in a financial cage of their own making, funding my empire with every rent check they wrote to keep a roof over their heads. Jasmine was a social pariah, and Trent was trading his custom-tailored suits for a county-issue jumpsuit. The Washington family curse had finally been eradicated. My driver pulled the black town car up to the glass facade of my agency. The building was a monument to clinical efficiency and modern power. I stepped out into the bustling city air, my mind already shifting from family pest control to corporate crisis management. The Sterling and Vance situation required my immediate attention. Richard Sterling was paying an exorbitant retainer to ensure his wealth management firm survived Trent's spectacular display of greed, and I always delivered flawlessly on my contracts. I walked through the revolving glass doors and stepped into the sprawling, immaculate marble lobby of my building. The security desk was positioned strategically to intercept any unauthorized visitors before they could even approach the private elevators. My lead building concierge, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, caught my attention immediately. She gave a subtle nod toward the far corner of the waiting area. Sitting on a low-slung leather sofa, bouncing his leg with frantic kinetic energy, was Malik. My younger brother looked completely unraveled. The expensive streetwear he usually flaunted looked rumpled as if he had slept in it. He was sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning of the lobby. He kept checking his phone, glancing over his shoulder and biting at his cuticles. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy, who had spent his entire life crashing cars and expecting me to applaud his existence, was gone. In his place was a terrified addict running out of time. I did not alter my pace. I walked directly toward the secure elevators, fully intending to let security forcefully escort him out of the building. But Malik spotted me. He jumped up, nearly tripping over his own expensive sneakers, and sprinted across the marble floor. "Camille, wait!" Malik shouted, his voice echoing awkwardly in the pristine corporate environment. "Please, I just need 5 minutes." Two security guards instantly stepped out from the main desk, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. They physically blocked his path, creating a solid wall between his erratic energy and my personal space. Malik threw his hands up in a gesture of surrender, his chest heaving. "Stand down," I instructed the guards, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "I will give him exactly 2 minutes. But keep him on that side of the velvet rope." Malik swallowed hard, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. He looked at the guards, then back at me, attempting to pull his features into a mask of brotherly solidarity. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. "Listen." Camille Malik began, keeping his voice in a hushed, frantic whisper. "I heard what happened this morning. I heard about Trent getting raided by the feds. Jasmine called me screaming, completely hysterical, and Mom left me a voicemail saying you bought the house. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her." He paused, forcing a crooked, desperate smile. "You played them beautifully, Camille. I mean it. It was a flawless execution. Warren and Brenda have been suffocating us all for years with their fake religious perfection, and Trent was always a condescending prick. You took out the trash. I respect the hustle. I really do. You and me, we are the only smart ones in this family." I stared at him. The sheer sociopathy of his pivot was almost impressive. Less than an hour after his parents had their entire world systematically dismantled, Malik was standing in my lobby praising the architect of their destruction simply because he thought it would buy him favor. He had absolutely zero loyalty to anyone but his own immediate survival. "You have 90 seconds left, Malik." I stated, my expression utterly bored. "Get to the point." His fake smile vanished, replaced immediately by raw, clawing desperation. "I need cash, Camille." He blurted out the words, stumbling over each other. "I need cash right now. Today. You know I have some debts. The guys I owe, they are not a bank. They are not going to send a collection agency or hurt my credit score. They are going to break both of my legs or worse. I promised them Warren was going to bail me out this week, but now Warren is completely broke and paying you rent. You hold all the capital. I need $200,000 wired to a specific account by 3:00 this afternoon." I let out a slow, deliberate breath. "You broke into my corporate lobby to ask me to pay off your underground bookies. You are even more delusional than your father." Security escort him out. "Wait, wait!" Malik yelled, stepping forward until his chest bumped against the security guard's outstretched arm. "I am not asking for a handout, Camille. I am offering a trade, a business transaction. I know you are handling the public relations crisis for Sterling and Vance. I know you need to control the narrative around Trent's embezzlement. I paused, tilting my head a fraction of an inch. Keep talking. Malik took a deep breath, his eyes wide and manic. Trent did not act alone. There is a whole shadow network he used to hide that money. I have the real dirt on him, Camille. I know about the hidden ledgers. I know where the burner phones are stashed in his golf locker. I have the exact routing numbers for the offshore betting accounts Trent used to funnel the stolen corporate funds. If you buy this information from me, you can hand it over to Richard Sterling. You will look like an absolute genius. You will save the firm millions in audit fees. All I want is my debts cleared. 200 grand for the key to Trent's entire criminal enterprise. It is a bargain. I looked at my younger brother. I observed the frantic pulse beating visibly in his neck, the way his hands shook as he offered to sell out his brother-in-law to save his own skin. He truly believed he had stumbled upon the ultimate leverage. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of corporate espionage. I took a step closer to the velvet rope. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, devastating clarity of a judge reading a final sentence. I do not need your dirt, Malik, I replied smoothly. His face fell. What do you mean you do not need it? This is gold, Camille. The feds will spend months trying to track those routing numbers. I am handing them to you on a silver platter. I do not need your dirt because I already have the FBI preliminary indictment report on Trent, I explained, watching his frantic energy suddenly freeze into total paralysis. When Richard Sterling retained my agency this morning, he provided me with the initial findings from his federal liaisons, so I could accurately prep the media containment strategy. I have read the entire file. Malik's breathing stopped entirely. You see, Malik Trent was greedy, but he was incredibly uncreative. I continued my words, striking him like physical blows. He needed a way to clean $340,000 of stolen client funds without alerting the Internal Revenue Service. He could not just deposit it into a standard checking account. He needed an established, high-volume, unregulated offshore pipeline. He needed an underground betting syndicate. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us, allowing the terrifying reality to slowly dawn on his face. And guess whose name is listed in the federal indictment as his primary accomplice for laundering the money through those offshore accounts, I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Malik's eyes widened to an impossible circumference. His jaw went completely slack. The expensive smartphone he had been gripping so tightly slipped from his sweaty fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, echoing crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. He did not even look down at it. Trent did not just use your bookies, Malik, I stated, driving the final nail into his coffin. He used your name. He used your digital signature. The federal investigators have categorized you as a willing and active co-conspirator in a massive corporate wire fraud and money laundering scheme. You are not a whistleblower offering me a trade. You are a federal target. No, Malik choked out the word, barely escaping his constricted throat. No, I did not know where the money came from. Trent just asked to use my accounts. He said he was hiding a bonus from Jasmine. I did not know it was stolen. I swear to God, Camille, I did not know. The federal government does not care about your ignorance, I replied coldly. They care about the paper trail. And the paper trail leads directly to you. Your bookies threatening to break your legs by Friday is the absolute least of your problems. The FBI does not break legs. They seize assets, they revoke passports, and they mandate mandatory minimum sentences. Malik staggered backward, his hands flying up to grab his own hair. He looked around the lobby wildly, as if expecting federal agents to step out from behind the marble pillars right then and there. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. Camille, you have to help me, he pleaded, his voice breaking into a high, terrified whine. You represent the firm. You can talk to Richard Sterling. You can tell the feds I was duped. You have to protect me. I am your brother. I looked at him with absolute, unwavering indifference. I felt no pity. I felt no familial obligation. I looked at the boy who had happily watched my parents steal my future, who had actively participated in my financial abuse, who had just tried to blackmail me to save himself. I am a crisis management architect, Malik, I said, turning my body toward the secure elevators. I protect paying clients. I protect my empire. I do not protect collateral damage. I signaled to the security guards. Remove him from the building, I ordered firmly. If he resists, call the authorities. I am sure the FBI would love to know exactly where to find him. I did not wait to watch them grab him. I walked away, the click of my heels echoing off the marble floors, leaving Malik standing over his shattered phone, entirely consumed by the consequences of his own spectacular failure. My elevator arrived, the stainless steel doors sliding open silently. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the penthouse executive suite, and watched the doors close on the last remaining piece of the Washington family delusion. The purge was complete. Now it was time to get to work. The fallout from Trent's arrest was absolute and immediate. For 48 hours, I watched from the serene elevation of my penthouse office as the carefully curated lives of my family members disintegrated across public platforms and federal databases. My phone remained silent, filtering out the frantic calls and unhinged text messages. I was untouchable, operating on a frequency they could no longer reach. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, a courier delivered a heavy gold-embossed envelope directly to my receptionist. It was not a legal threat or a federal subpoena. It was a formal summons printed on the heavy cardstock of Covenant Grace Fellowship, the sprawling megachurch where my parents had purchased their social standing one tithe at a time. The letter was signed by Pastor David Miller himself, requesting my mandatory presence for an urgent family mediation in his private pastoral chambers. Jasmine had finally exhausted her secular options. Her bank accounts were frozen by the SEC, her country club friends had blocked her number, and her husband was facing a decade in federal prison. Stripped of her image, she had retreated to the only arena where she still believed she held the high ground. She ran to the church, dragging the remains of our family behind her, begging the patriarchs to bring me to heel. I did not ignore the summons. I welcomed it. Some structures need to be demolished from the inside. I arrived at Covenant Grace Fellowship precisely at 2 o'clock on Friday. The building was a monument to untaxed corporate wealth, boasting stadium seating for 5,000, a broadcast studio, and a private cafe. I bypassed the main sanctuary and walked directly toward the executive pastoral wing. I was not wearing my usual corporate armor. I had selected a custom-tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit, a crisp ivory silk blouse, and a vintage Cartier watch. The tailoring was immaculate, the fabric radiating the quiet, devastating permanence of true wealth. It was the exact opposite of the loud, heavily branded, leased luxury my family used to camouflage their insecurities. A nervous administrative assistant escorted me through a set of heavy oak doors into Pastor Miller's private chambers. The room was designed to intimidate, filled with dark leather seating, towering bookshelves, and a massive mahogany desk positioned strategically to catch the afternoon sunlight. The entire cast of the tragedy was already assembled. Jasmine sat rigidly in a leather wingback chair. The glossy, untouchable socialite was completely gone. Her hair was pulled into a severe, messy knot, and she wore a plain black dress that hung loosely on her frame. Her hands trembled violently as she clutched a damp tissue. Beside her sat Trent. He had managed to post his $250,000 bail, likely by liquidating every remaining asset he could hide from the federal freeze. He looked entirely hollowed out, his skin carrying a sickly gray pallor. I could faintly see the bulky outline of a federal ankle monitor protruding beneath the hem of his slacks. Across the room, Warren and Brenda occupied a velvet love seat. They looked exhausted but defiant. Warren was sitting with his shoulders thrown back, desperately trying to project the authority of a respected church elder, despite the fact that I legally owned the clothes on his back. Brenda glared at me the moment I entered her mouth, forming a tight, hateful line. And sitting behind the vast mahogany desk was Pastor Miller. He was a polished, charismatic man who made his living preaching prosperity gospel to desperate people. He smiled benevolently as I took the single empty chair positioned directly in the center of the room. Camille Pastor Miller began steppling his manicured fingers and leaning forward with practiced pastoral concern. "Thank you for answering my call. We are gathered here today because the enemy is attempting to sow discord and destruction within a godly family. Your sister came to me in deep spiritual distress. The Washingtons are pillars of this congregation. We need to find a path to forgiveness, grace, and immediate restoration. I crossed my legs, resting my hands lightly on my lap. I did not speak. I simply let the silence stretch, forcing them to fill the void with their desperation. Trent took the cue. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands, executing a performance that was truly nauseating to witness. I made a mistake. Pastor Trent choked out, his voice cracking with manufactured grief. He lifted his head, forcing a single trembling tear to roll down his cheek. It was a clerical error, a minor oversight in a massive corporate account. But Camille is using her connections in the media to twist it into something ugly. She released that horrific press statement. She sent the federal agents to my office. She is a vindictive, bitter woman trying to destroy a godly marriage because she has always been jealous of what Jasmine and I share. Jasmine let out a loud, dramatic sob, leaning her head onto Trent's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, playing the role of the devoted, persecuted protector. I am a provider, Trent continued, his voice taking on a tone of righteous indignation. I have always taken care of my family. I have always supported this church. And now my own sister-in-law is actively working with the secular authorities to ruin my reputation over a simple misunderstanding. It is evil, Pastor. It is pure spiritual warfare. I maintained my absolute silence, my expression unreadable. I watched Trent try to reframe a multi-year, highly calculated embezzlement and offshore money laundering scheme as a simple clerical error. He was relying entirely on Pastor Miller's ignorance of federal financial law. Warren, seeing that Trent's performance had set the stage, immediately seized the opportunity. He stood up from the love seat, walking to the center of the room. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his physical presence to dominate the space, just as he had done in our living room when I was a child. This rebellion ends today, Camille Warren announced, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of a Sunday sermon. You have lost your way. You have let pride and worldly success harden your heart against your own flesh and blood. You are attacking your sister's husband, and worse, you have secretly and maliciously bought the debt on my home to hold it over my head like a tyrant. Warren turned to Pastor Miller, gesturing toward me with a look of profound, theatrical disappointment. She used a shell company, Pastor. She bought the loans that saved this church's real estate venture 3 years ago, and now she is threatening to evict her own mother and father. It is deeply unbiblical. It is a profound breach of honor. Pastor Miller looked at me, shaking his head with a heavy, disappointed sigh. Camille, the scripture commands us to honor our father and mother. It commands us to forgive 70 times 7. To hold financial leverage over your parents is a grave sin. To actively participate in the destruction of your brother-in-law's livelihood is a violation of family sanctity. I am the head of this family, Warren declared, stepping closer to my chair, attempting to use the pastor's spiritual cover to enforce his demands. And I am telling you how we are going to fix this. You are going to sign over the deed to my house and the titles to our cars today. You will forgive that debt entirely, as a daughter should. Then you are going to use that PR firm of yours to fix Trent's situation. Warren slammed his hand down on the back of my chair. You will draft a new press release, Warren ordered, his voice echoing in the private chamber. You will state that your initial findings were incorrect. You will frame the narrative to show that Trent is a victim of a corrupt corporate culture at Sterling and Vance. You will use your media contacts to clear his name, and you will secure the necessary funds to cover his legal defense. You will do this to protect the Washington family name. Brenda leaned forward on the velvet love seat, her eyes flashing with venomous entitlement. You owe us this, Camille, she snapped, her voice cutting through the heavy air of the room. You sit there in your fancy clothes acting like you are better than us, but you would be nothing without the foundation we provided. I kept a roof over your head. I put food on your plate. You would not have that business, you would not have that agency if your father had not taught you the value of hard work and discipline by making you pay rent when you lived under our roof. You owe this family your success, and it is time you paid your tithes directly to us. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. Brenda was actively trying to rewrite a history of financial extortion into a heartwarming tale of maternal guidance. She was demanding that I save a convicted felon and forgive a multi-million-dollar debt as repayment for the basic legally mandated requirement of housing her own teenage child. Pastor Miller folded his hands on his desk, looking at me with absolute expectation. The path is clear, Camille. Your father has laid out a righteous solution. Repent of this vindictive anger. Restore your parents' home to them. Protect your sister's marriage. Use the talents God gave you to heal this family, not tear it apart. I sat perfectly still in my custom Tom Ford suit. I looked at Jasmine shivering and broken. I looked at Trent sweating through his shirt, desperate to avoid a federal prison sentence. I looked at Warren and Brenda, clinging to the delusional belief that their parental titles gave them unlimited access to my empire. And finally, I looked at Pastor Miller, a man completely blind to the reality of the predators sitting in his office. The trap was fully set. They had willingly walked into the center of it, locked the door behind themselves, and handed me the detonator. I slowly uncrossed my legs and smoothed the flawless fabric of my trousers. It was time to introduce the church to the truth. I did not argue theology. I did not debate the scriptures Pastor Miller had just weaponized against me. I simply reached into the interior pocket of my blazer and withdrew a sleek silver digital voice recorder. The metallic click it made as I placed it on the polished mahogany of the pastor's desk was the loudest sound in the room. Pastor Miller frowned, his pastoral mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Camille, what is this? We are trying to have a spiritual dialogue. This is the truth you just asked me to introduce to the church, Pastor. I replied, my voice devoid of any inflection. 2 weeks ago, Trent was spiraling. The federal investigators had just issued their first round of subpoenas. In his absolute panic, he tried to call Malik's burner phone to finalize their exit strategy. But Trent was careless. He dialed one digit wrong and connected directly to my executive assistant's secure voicemail. She forwarded it to me immediately. Trent lurched forward in his chair. The sickly gray pallor of his skin instantly morphed into a stark, bloodless white. No. You cannot play that here. That is illegally obtained. You left it on my corporate server, Trent, I stated coldly. It is company property. I pressed the play button. The audio quality was crystal clear, filling the quiet, sanctified space of the pastor's office with the panicked, breathless voice of the golden son-in-law. Malik, pick up the phone. It is Trent. The feds are pulling the Cayman routing numbers tomorrow morning. We are out of time. You need to get the secondary ledgers into your dad's home office tonight. Slip them into the bottom drawer of Warren's filing cabinet behind his church financial binders. We dumped the entire paper trail on the old man. Warren signed the initial commercial loan documents for the church real estate venture anyway. We transfer the dummy accounts to his home IP address. The feds will think he used my wealth management firm to cover his tracks and float the church deficit. He takes the fall. He is an old man, a pastor, he might even get leniency. But we have to make him the primary target, or we are both going to federal prison. Call me back the second it is done. I reached out and pressed the stop button. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. It was a thick, toxic quiet that pressed against the walls of the room. Pastor Miller sat perfectly frozen behind his desk. The benevolent, peacemaking clergyman had vanished, replaced by a man staring directly at the reality of federal subpoenas and church financial audits. He looked at Warren not with spiritual brotherhood, but with the cold calculation of a man protecting his own ministry from collateral damage. Jasmine was the first to break the silence. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto her husband. The man she had just defended minutes ago as a godly provider, a victim of my vindictive jealousy. You were going to frame my father, Jasmine? Whispered her voice, trembling with a terrifying, unhinged energy. You were going to send my father to federal prison to save yourself. Jasmine, baby. Listen to me, Trent stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. That recording is taken out of context. We were just running scenarios. Malik and I were just throwing ideas around because Camille put us in a corner. Warren's reaction was not verbal. The distinguished church elder, the man who had just commanded me to save his family name, let out a sound that was more animal than human. He did not look at Trent. He looked directly across the room at his own son. Malik had tried to sink into the shadows near the bookshelf the moment the recording began playing. Now he was pressed flat against the wood, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. "You were going to put those ledgers in my office," Warren roared, the veins in his neck bulging as he launched himself off the velvet love seat. "Dad, wait. I did not do it. I swear I did not do it." Malik shrieked, throwing his arms up to protect his face. Warren lunged across the room, completely abandoning every ounce of his dignified pastoral facade. He grabbed Malik by the collar of his expensive designer shirt, slamming him hard against the heavy oak bookshelves. Books rained down around them as Warren wrapped his hands around his son's lapels, shaking him violently. "You worthless parasite. I gave you everything. I paid your debts. I protected you from this family. And you were going to let me die in a federal cell." Warren bellowed, his face inches from Malik's terrified eyes. Jasmine suddenly lunged out of her wingback chair, throwing herself at Trent. She began striking his chest and shoulders with her closed fists, her manicured nails catching the fabric of his suit. "You coward. You absolute coward. You ruined my life and you tried to destroy my family. I hate you. I wish you were dead." Trent stumbled backward, trying to block her blows, tripping over the edge of the oriental rug and crashing hard into a side table. A heavy brass lamp shattered on the floor, adding the sound of breaking glass to the absolute chaos. Brenda was screaming at the top of her lungs, hovering near the brawl between her husband and her son, grabbing frantically at Warren's arm, begging him to stop crying, that the devil was in the room. Pastor Miller was on his feet, his hands raised, shouting for order, demanding that they remember where they were. His voice was completely drowned out by the violence and the screaming. The facade of the perfect, faithful family had not just cracked, it had completely detonated. They had turned into a pack of starving wolves, tearing each other apart right in front of the clergy, entirely consumed by their own treachery. I remained seated in the center of the room. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply watched the inevitable implosion of the Washington family empire. The carefully constructed hierarchy they had used to torture me for decades was eating itself alive. After a long, satisfying moment, I calmly reached down and picked up my digital recorder from the mahogany desk. I slipped it back into the interior pocket of my blazer. I stood up, completely unbothered by the shouting and the struggling happening mere feet away from me. I looked down at my sleeve and casually brushed a microscopic speck of dust off my lapel. I stepped around the shattered remains of the brass lamp and walked directly into the path of Warren and Malik. Warren had Malik pinned against the wall, but he paused, breathing heavily as I stopped right beside them. The room momentarily quieted the sheer force of my composure, demanding their attention. I looked directly into Warren's bloodshot, furious eyes. "You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my properties," I stated, my voice carrying effortlessly over the remaining sounds of Jasmine's sobbing. "All of them. The house, the cars, everything listed in the portfolio I showed you this morning. By Sunday afternoon, I expect the keys to be left on the kitchen counter, and I expect you to be gone." Warren opened his mouth, his face a mask of shock and defeat, but he had absolutely no leverage left. The pastor had heard the truth. His son had betrayed him. His son-in-law was a federal criminal, and I owned his entire existence. I turned away from him and began walking with measured, confident steps toward the heavy oak doors of the pastoral chambers. Before I could reach the handle, Brenda broke away from the center of the room. She scrambled across the floor and grabbed my arm. Her grip was weak, trembling. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Camille, please," Brenda sobbed hysterically, her fingers digging into the sleeve of my Tom Ford suit. "You cannot do this. You cannot throw us out on the street. Where will we go? We have absolutely nothing left. And tomorrow is our 40th anniversary gala. The country club is booked. We have 200 guests arriving. All of our friends from the church. We cannot cancel it. It will ruin us." I stopped. I did not pull my arm away. I slowly turned my head and looked down at the woman who had charged me rent to sleep in my childhood bedroom. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband and favored children belittle and exploit me for my entire life. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression perfectly serene, devoid of any mercy or hesitation. "Sounds like a great time to start packing," I replied softly. I pulled my arm free from her grasp, opened the heavy oak doors, and walked out into the quiet, sunlit hallway of the church. I did not look back. The sheer, unadulterated madness of the Washington family was truly a spectacle to behold. Less than 24 hours after watching their fraudulent empire collapse into a pile of federal subpoenas and eviction notices, they were throwing a party. It takes a special terminal kind of delusion to stand on the absolute precipice of federal prison and homelessness, yet still prioritize the deposit on a ballroom. Warren and Brenda had refused to cancel their 40th anniversary gala. In their warped, status-obsessed minds, canceling the event at the Grand Piedmont Country Club would have been an admission of defeat. It would have signaled to their congregation and their elite social circle that the rumors were true. So instead of packing their belongings or hiring criminal defense attorneys, they funded this opulent charade with the absolute last of their maxed-out credit cards. They were clinging to the pathetic, irrational belief that if they could just keep up appearances, if they could just project the image of a powerful, unified family to 200 important guests, I would not actually pull the trigger on the evictions. They thought public pressure and the heavy weight of social expectation would force me to back down. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they had created. I did not stay home. I would not have missed this for the world. I arrived at the country club precisely an hour after the doors opened, ensuring the ballroom was packed and the cocktail hour was in full swing. I stepped out of my town car and handed my coat to the valet, feeling the cool, crisp evening air against my skin. For this particular execution, I had not worn standard formal wear. I wore a custom-tailored floor-length emerald silk gown with a sharp architectural neckline that radiated the kind of quiet, devastating generational wealth they had spent their entire lives desperately pretending to have. I wore no heavy, flashy logos. My only accessories were a pair of flawless diamond drop earrings and the cold, unbothered certainty of a woman who held the deed to the building her enemies were sleeping in. The moment I stepped through the heavy double doors of the grand ballroom, the atmospheric pressure of the room immediately shifted. The string quartet playing softly in the corner seemed to fade into the background. The low hum of 200 wealthy guests chatting over crystal flutes of champagne noticeably dipped. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a current over water. I walked into the room with measured, predatory grace. My family was stationed near the lavish, multi-tiered champagne tower at the center of the room. The sight of them was a masterpiece of crumbling facades. Malik was leaning heavily against a cocktail table, sweating through his tuxedo, throwing back an amber drink with shaking hands. He kept scanning the room, his eyes darting toward the exit, looking like a man expecting his bookies to walk through the door at any second. Trent stood beside Jasmine, looking physically ill. The arrogant wealth manager was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of a man vibrating with federal anxiety, his tailored suit hanging loosely on his frame. Jasmine looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and hastily glued back together. Her smile was rigid, terrified, and utterly devoid of life. And then there were Warren and Brenda. They were holding court, greeting the church elders and local politicians with wide, artificial smiles. But the moment their eyes locked onto me, the smiles shattered. Brenda physically recoiled, her hand flying up to clutch the heavy pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. Warren's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. They glared at me with a mixture of absolute hatred and paralyzing fear. I did not glare back. I offered them a slow, serene smile that conveyed absolute dominance. I was the apex predator, walking into a cage of wounded prey. I moved through the crowd accepting greetings and offering polite, cryptic pleasantries to the business associates and church members who approached me. I did not seek out my family. I simply claimed a seat at a prime table near the front of the stage, ordered a glass of sparkling water, and waited for the inevitable performance. Warren could not help himself. His narcissism was a terminal disease. He needed to control the room. He needed to re-establish his authority in front of his congregation. As the dinner service began to wind down, and the waiters cleared the china plates, Warren stepped up to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. He tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback silencing the remaining chatter in the room. He stood under the bright spotlight, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, projecting the practiced, charismatic aura of a beloved patriarch. Family, friends, brothers and sisters in Christ. Warren began, his voice booming with rich pastoral cadence across the quiet ballroom. Brenda and I are so deeply blessed to stand before you tonight. 40 years. 40 years of a godly marriage built on faith, built on sacrifice, and built on the unbreakable foundation of family. A smattering of polite applause echoed through the room. Warren smiled, feeding off the validation. He gestured grandly toward the table where his broken, terrified children sat. We look at the legacy we have built. We look at our beautiful daughter Jasmine and her devoted husband Trent, a man of exceptional business acumen and integrity. I took a slow sip of my water, watching Trent physically flinch at the word integrity. We look at our son Malik. Warren continued, his voice swelling with completely fabricated pride. A young man finding his path, guided by the strong moral compass this family has provided. We have weathered storms. We have faced the trials of this world. But we have always put the Washington family name above all else. Because in this life, blood is the only currency that truly matters. Warren paused. The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavy. The practiced warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a dark, theatrical sorrow. He slowly turned his head. He looked down from the stage, his gaze locking directly onto me, sitting alone at my table. 200 heads turned to follow his line of sight. The entire ballroom was staring at me. Warren thought he had me cornered. He thought the weight of the crowd, the pressure of his spiritual authority, would crush me into submission. He was attempting a public execution. But as the good book tells us, Warren said, his voice dropping into a register of profound, weaponized pity, even the most devoted shepherds sometimes lose a sheep to the wilderness. He gripped the microphone stand, leaning forward, addressing the crowd but speaking directly to me. We raise our children to know the value of love. We teach them that money is fleeting, but family is eternal. Yet the secular world is a dangerous place. It can poison a mind. It can convince a person that corporate titles and bank accounts are a substitute for a home. It can breed a cold heart. Brenda let out a soft, dramatic sniffle from the front table, playing her role perfectly. I look at my daughter Camille tonight, Warren announced, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. I see a woman who has achieved worldly success. I see a woman who has built an agency, who wears expensive clothes, who walks in rooms with the elite. But as a father, my heart breaks for her, because I see a woman who has chosen money over blood. I see a woman with no family of her own, no husband to stand beside her, no children to carry on her legacy. I see a woman who will return to an empty, lonely house tonight, surrounded by wealth but entirely bankrupt in the spirit. A low murmur rippled through the older church members in the crowd. Warren was expertly playing on their traditional conservative values, painting me as a bitter, career-obsessed spinster who was attacking her righteous, loving family out of sheer, lonely jealousy. I ask you all tonight, Warren continued, raising one hand toward the ceiling in a gesture of pastoral blessing. Pray for my daughter. Pray that God softens her cold heart. Pray that she realizes that destroying her family to protect a corporate bottom line will only leave her with ashes. Pray that she finds the grace to forgive debts, to protect the family name, and to return to the fold before she ruins the very people who gave her life. He lowered his hand, looking down at me with a triumphant, challenging glare. He had laid it all out. He had used his pulpit to publicly command me to fix Trent's federal nightmare and forgive their eviction, hiding his extortion behind the veil of family unity and religious forgiveness. He was waiting for me to lower my head. He was waiting for me to shrink under the collective judgment of the room. I did not shrink. I set my crystal water glass down on the table. The sound was soft, but in the heavy silence following his speech, it was distinct. I sat perfectly still, my posture immaculate, my emerald gown catching the light from the chandeliers. I looked up at the man on the stage. I did not show anger. I did not show embarrassment. I offered him a look of absolute chilling boredom. Warren had played his final card. He had fired his last desperate shot in front of an audience of 200 people. And he had missed completely. He had just set the stage for his own absolute annihilation, and he was too arrogant to even realize the trap had already snapped shut. The polite, hesitant applause began to ripple through the Grand Piedmont Country Club ballroom. It was a fragile, nervous sound. The church elders, local politicians, and wealthy socialites were clapping not out of genuine agreement with Warren's vicious public dressing down of his own daughter, but out of the deeply ingrained wealthy instinct to politely gloss over sudden social discomfort. Warren stood on the small, elevated stage at the front of the room, his chest puffed out, basking in the scattered applause, as if he had just delivered the greatest sermon of his life. He was smiling down at me, a tight, victorious smirk that communicated his absolute certainty that he had won. He truly believed that by shaming me in front of his elite peers, he had successfully backed me into a corner. He thought public humiliation would force my hand. I did not break eye contact. I slowly raised my crystal flute of champagne, tilting it in a mock silent toast to his supreme delusion, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cool liquid slid down my throat as I waited for the final glorious drop of the curtain. The applause was just beginning to swell, politely orchestrated and encouraged by Brenda from her front row table, when the heavy brass-studded oak double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They burst inward. The sound was like a physical blow in the cavernous, acoustically perfected room. The heavy wood slammed violently against the brass wall, stopped the reverberation, cutting instantly through the polite clapping and the soft background notes of the string quartet. 200 heads snapped toward the entrance in perfect unison. The applause died a sudden, unnatural death. It was not the catering staff wheeling out the grand multi-tiered anniversary cake. A line of men and women strode into the opulent ballroom. They were not wearing tuxedos or emerald silk evening gowns. They wore dark utilitarian suits, heavy tactical belts, and navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering printed across the back and chest. FBI. The sheer visual dissonance of federal agents invading a high society country club gala was momentarily paralyzing. For 3 agonizing seconds, the entire room was frozen in a collective state of suspended animation. The string quartet cellist abruptly stopped mid-bow, creating a jarring, discordant screech that echoed horribly. The waiters froze in the aisles, silver trays of appetizers balanced precariously on their fingertips. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved from absolute authority, did not hesitate. He walked down the center aisle of the ballroom with a predatory, uncompromising stride. 5 heavily armed agents fanned out immediately behind him, moving with terrifying precision to secure the perimeter of the room and physically block the main exits. They walked straight past my table. The air displaced by their rapid movement ruffled the hem of my silk gown. I did not blink. I simply lowered my champagne glass, rested my hands in my lap, and watched the beautiful, chaotic machinery of justice finally engage. On the stage, Warren's victorious smirk dissolved into an expression of profound, uncomprehending idiocy. He tapped the microphone, a sharp squeal of feedback echoing through the silent room, as if trying to assert his pastoral authority over the unfolding nightmare. "Excuse me, Warren," boomed his voice, wavering with forced indignation. "This is a private ticketed event. You are interrupting a private anniversary celebration. I demand to know the meaning of this intrusion." The lead agent ignored him completely. He did not even look at the man standing on the stage. His eyes were locked with laser focus on the table situated directly to my left. He was looking at Trent. Trent knew. The moment the heavy wooden doors had crashed open, the color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening, translucent shade of gray. His posture entirely collapsed. The wealthy, arrogant investment manager who had just played the victim in the pastor's office was gone. He looked exactly like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had closed. He took a tiny involuntary step backward, his back hitting the edge of the dining table, causing crystal water glasses to teeter dangerously and spill over the white linen. Trenton Lawson, the lead agent, announced, his voice projecting across the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. It was a voice accustomed to cutting through chaos and demanding immediate compliance. "You are under arrest." Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She dropped her designer clutch. The expensive beaded bag hit the floor with a heavy thud, spilling lipstick and credit cards across the patterned carpet. But she did not even look down. She stared at her husband in absolute, unfiltered horror. "Trent," she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. "Trent, what is happening? Tell them there is a mistake." "There is no mistake," the agent stated, stepping directly up to their table. Two other agents immediately flanked him, their hands resting securely on their utility belts. "Trenton Lawson, you are being taken into federal custody on a grand jury indictment for 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of corporate embezzlement, and 1 count of money laundering. Place your hands behind your back." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Embezzlement, money laundering, federal custody. The polite, wealthy crowd surrounding us instantly erupted. Gasps echoed from every corner of the ballroom. Whispers turned into loud, frantic murmuring. I could see the church elders exchanging terrified, scandalized looks, immediately physically leaning away from the Washington family table, as if the federal charges were a contagious disease that might infect their own reputations. Trent did not argue. He did not put up a fight or declare his innocence. The profound, crushing reality of his situation had finally overridden his lifelong arrogance. He slowly raised his trembling hands, offering his wrists to the federal agents. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking into place echoed perfectly in the shocked silence of the immediate vicinity. No, Brenda screamed. Her wail tore through the ballroom, shrill and utterly hysterical. She scrambled out of her chair, her heavy pearl necklace bouncing wildly against her chest. "You cannot do this. He is a good man. He is a godly man. Warren, do something. Tell them to stop." Warren was completely immobilized. The powerful patriarch who had just commanded the room moments ago was rooted to the stage, his mouth hanging slightly open, his hands gripping the edges of the wooden podium as he watched his golden son-in-law being publicly shackled. His entire carefully curated kingdom was burning to the ground right in front of the very people he desperately needed to impress. As the agents turned Trent around to march him out of the room, a sudden violent movement erupted from the far side of the table. Malik, my younger brother, had been standing near the edge of the dance floor, sweating profusely since the moment he arrived. I had warned him in my corporate lobby. I had told him the federal paper trail led directly to his offshore betting accounts. The absolute, undeniable reality of his impending incarceration finally broke his fragile, panicked mind. Malik did not surrender. He ran. He bolted away from the table, shoving a heavy wooden dining chair backward with a loud crash. He sprinted wildly toward the back of the ballroom, heading straight for the swinging wooden doors that led to the catering kitchens. "Stop him!" One of the agents barked, their voice instantly shifting from procedural calm to tactical command. The room descended into absolute, unadulterated pandemonium. Malik was running blindly, fueled by sheer animalistic terror. He barreled past a cluster of shocked guests, shoving an elderly woman in a sequined dress roughly out of his way. He crashed hard into a catering server, carrying a massive tray of champagne flutes. The silver tray went flying, raining glass and expensive alcohol across the polished parquet dance floor in a spectacular, glittering crash. Women shrieked, pulling their long evening gowns away from the shattered glass. Men shouted in alarm, stumbling backward over their own feet to get out of the way. Malik slipped on the spilled champagne, his expensive dress shoes losing traction on the wet wood. He managed to stay upright, lunging desperately for the brass handle of the kitchen doors. He never made it. A tactical agent who had been securing the perimeter anticipated the trajectory perfectly. He moved with blinding, terrifying speed, intercepting Malik just 3 feet from the exit. The agent did not hesitate. He lowered his shoulder and tackled my brother with the full, devastating force of a seasoned professional. The impact was brutal. Malik hit the polished wooden floor hard, the breath violently expelled from his lungs in a loud, agonizing grunt. He slid across the wet floor, tangling in the heavy velvet curtains draped near the exit. "Get off me!" Malik screamed, thrashing wildly, fighting with the sloppy, uncoordinated flailing of a terrified amateur. "Let me go. I did not do it. Trent did it. It was Trent's money." "Stop resisting! Put your hands behind your back!" the agent roared, driving a knee firmly into the small of Malik's back, immediately neutralizing the pathetic struggle. A second agent was on him in an instant, grabbing Malik's flailing arm and twisting it sharply behind his back. The second set of handcuffs ratcheted closed. The click was wonderfully final. The Grand Piedmont Country Club ballroom was now a scene of total irreversible devastation. The elegant 40th anniversary gala had been transformed into an active federal crime scene. Guests had their smartphones out, the harsh bright flashes of their cameras strobing rapidly as they recorded the spectacular, undeniable downfall of the Washington family. The elite social circle that Warren and Brenda had spent decades meticulously cultivating was actively documenting their ultimate humiliation for the evening news and social media feeds. There was nowhere to hide. Jasmine was on her knees in her designer dress, sobbing hysterically into her hands, completely ignored by the husband being marched forcefully toward the main exit. Brenda was screaming incoherently, trying to push past the horrified church elders to get to Malik, only to be held back by the very people who were now actively putting physical distance between themselves and her toxic presence. Warren stood utterly alone on the stage, the spotlight still illuminating his frozen, horrified face. His grand, righteous toast had ended in the spectacular arrest of his entire male lineage. I remained seated at my table, completely untouched by the surrounding chaos. The screaming, the shattered glass, the flashing cameras were merely background noise. I picked up my crystal flute, took one final slow sip of the expensive champagne they had purchased with stolen funds, and set the glass down gently on the pristine white tablecloth. The execution was flawless. The cancer had been entirely excised from my life. The golden children were finally getting exactly what they deserved. The federal agents moved with a brutal, synchronized efficiency that completely shattered the delicate, perfumed atmosphere of the grand ballroom. Trent was hauled backward, his expensive, tailored suit bunching awkwardly around his shoulders as his hands were forcefully pinned behind his back. He did not utter a single word of protest. His eyes were wide, staring blankly ahead at the crystal chandeliers, completely paralyzed by the sudden terrifying materialization of his own guilt. The lead agent recited his Miranda rights in a sharp, clipped cadence that echoed off the high, gilded ceilings, turning the legal warning into a public broadcast of the Washington family's absolute ruin. Across the room, the situation with Malik was far less dignified. He was still thrashing against the polished hardwood floor, his designer dress shoes slipping uselessly in the puddles of spilled champagne. Two tactical agents hauled him to his feet, ignoring his panicked, high-pitched whining. He was weeping openly, tears and sweat streaking down his face, begging the agents to let him call his lawyer, begging them to believe that Trent had forced him into the offshore routing schemes. The agents simply tightened their grip on his arms and marched him roughly toward the main exit, his protests echoing pitifully through the cavernous space. The exit of the Golden Son and the Golden Son-in-law left a vacuum in the room that was instantly filled by the collective shock of Atlanta's elite. For decades, Warren and Brenda had meticulously curated this specific audience. They had flattered the right politicians, tithed to the right charities, and hosted the right dinners to secure their position at the absolute pinnacle of local high society. Now that carefully constructed social hierarchy was permanently disintegrating right before their eyes. I watched as a prominent state judge, a man who had just clapped enthusiastically for Warren's toast, hastily set his half-empty wineglass on a passing tray and grabbed his wife's arm, steering her urgently toward the coat check. The senior elders of Covenant Grace Fellowship, the very men who had demanded my submission in the pastoral chambers just hours earlier, were actively turning their backs to the stage, whispering furiously to one another as they scrambled to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. No one was stepping forward to offer comfort. No one was demanding an explanation from the authorities. The wealthy and the powerful are highly attuned to the scent of a sinking ship, and the Washington family was currently plummeting to the bottom of the ocean. Jasmine was completely oblivious to the mass exodus happening around her. She had collapsed entirely, her legs giving out beneath her as she sank onto the patterned carpet. Her ruined designer gown, a frothy confection of pale pink silk and hand-sewn beadwork, absorbed the spilled champagne and the dirty water from a knocked-over floral arrangement. She sat in the puddle of her own destroyed fairy tale, her hands pressed over her face, her shoulders heaving with violent guttural sobs. The pristine, untouched socialite was gone. She was now just the wife of a federal criminal. A woman who possessed absolutely no marketable skills, no independent wealth, and no future outside the walls of the courtroom she was inevitably heading toward. On the stage, Warren and Brenda were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their sudden absolute destruction. They had funded this lavish 200-guest spectacle with the absolute last of their maxed-out credit cards. They had leveraged their final pennies on the delusion that if they simply kept up appearances, if they just maintained the facade of success, I would be too intimidated by public opinion to follow through with the evictions. They had bet their entire existence on the belief that they could still control the narrative. They were wrong. They were homeless, bankrupt, and publicly disgraced. I sat at my prime table for one long, satisfying minute, allowing the reality of the situation to fully saturate the room. The chaos was beginning to subside, replaced by the hushed, frantic shuffling of guests rushing to escape. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. My emerald silk gown rustled softly as I smoothed the fabric. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice or attempt to draw attention to myself. I simply began to walk. As I moved across the floor, the remaining guests parted from me. The whispers that had previously carried tones of judgment or curiosity now held a distinct note of fear and profound respect. They looked at me not as the estranged daughter of a disgraced pastor, but as the architect of his demise. They recognized power, and they yielded to it. I stepped over a discarded linen napkin and bypassed the shattered remains of the champagne flutes. I walked directly toward the stage, stopping at the exact spot where Jasmine was weeping on the floor. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her a word of comfort. I simply stepped around her ruined dress and looked up at the stage. Warren and Brenda were staring down at me. The arrogant fire that had burned in Warren's eyes during his pompous, self-righteous toast had been entirely extinguished. He looked hollowed out, a pathetic, broken old man trapped under a harsh spotlight. Brenda was trembling, her hands gripping the wooden podium for physical support, her face completely drained of color. I walked up the 3 short carpeted steps to the stage. I moved into their personal space, forcing them to look directly into my eyes. There was no anger left in my chest. There was no residual resentment, no lingering hurt, no desire to yell or demand an apology. Those emotions belonged to a vulnerable child who had spent decades waiting for parents who were fundamentally incapable of loving her. That child was gone. In her place stood a woman who had just executed a flawless surgical extraction of a terminal disease. I looked at Warren, examining the deep lines of stress etched into his forehead. I looked at Brenda, noting the desperate, terrified trembling of her lower lip. "You spent 35 years telling me I was the family failure because I would not play your games," I said, my voice quiet, perfectly steady and colder than ice. I paused, allowing the silence between us to stretch, ensuring that every single syllable landed with maximum devastating impact. I tilted my head slightly, gesturing vaguely toward the doors where Trent and Malik had just been hauled away in federal handcuffs, and then down to the floor where Jasmine was still sobbing in a puddle of spilled wine. "Look at your golden children now." Warren closed his eyes, a single agonizing tear squeezing past his lashes and tracking through the deep wrinkles of his cheek. He did not speak. He had absolutely nothing left to say. The undeniable truth of his failure was currently being booked into federal custody and weeping on the floor of a rented country club ballroom. Brenda let out a soft, choked whimper, burying her face in her husband's shoulder, finally hiding from the reality she had spent her entire life helping to construct. I did not wait for a response. Their silence was the only closure I would ever need. I turned my back on the wreckage of my toxic family. The physical movement felt incredibly light, as if a heavy, suffocating gravity had suddenly been lifted from my shoulders. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my head held high, my posture immaculate. The few remaining guests watched me in stunned silence. The string quartet had long since packed away their instruments. The party was officially over. I pushed through the heavy brass-studded double doors and walked through the grand foyer, leaving the stifling, desperate atmosphere of the country club behind me. I stepped out from under the ornate portico and into the crisp, cool night air of Atlanta. The air smelled like pine needles and clean pavement. It was refreshing. It was the scent of absolute freedom. The valet saw me immediately and signaled to the line of waiting vehicles. As I stood on the edge of the circular driveway, the sleek, immaculate black Maybach glided silently out of the shadows and pulled to a smooth stop directly in front of me. Before the driver could open the door, my phone vibrated sharply inside my evening clutch. I unclasped the small diamond-studded bag and pulled out the device. The bright screen illuminated my face in the dim lighting of the driveway. It was a secure, encrypted text message from my lead financial officer, a man who had been working tirelessly on a secondary project while I handled the domestic demolition inside. I opened the message. It consisted of 2 simple sentences. The corporate merger just cleared. You just made another $20 million. I read the words twice, the glowing green text confirming the final, perfect detail of the evening. While the Washington family was facing total financial ruin, public disgrace, and the immediate seizure of all their worldly assets, my empire had just expanded exponentially. I pressed the side button, locking the screen, and slipped the phone back into my clutch. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. It was simply the logical, inevitable outcome of my own unyielding competence. I reached into the clutch one last time and withdrew a pair of oversized dark Tom Ford sunglasses. The night was dark, but the glare of the country club lights and the flashing bulbs of the opportunistic paparazzi gathering near the front gates were bright. I slid the dark frames over my eyes, completely shielding my expression from the world, cementing the impenetrable armor I had spent my life forging. The driver stepped out and opened the heavy rear door of the Maybach. I slid gracefully into the plush, pristine leather of the back seat, the quiet luxury of the interior immediately wrapping around me. The driver closed the door, sealing me inside the soundproof cabin. He climbed into the front seat, checked the rearview mirror, and met my gaze through the dark tint of my lenses. "Take me home," I commanded. The greatest lesson here is that you cannot heal in the environment that broke you. True power does not stem from biological obligations or maintaining a hollow, false facade. Instead, it is forged through unshakable independence, fierce boundaries, and the absolute courage to walk away from toxic dynamics. Blood might connect you, but it never entitles anyone to exploit your true success. When you finally stop playing their games, you reclaim your own narrative. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with toxic relatives? Share your story below, and please subscribe for more empowering tales of absolute resilience.